What was the last game you played that impacted you in such a way you'll never forget it? A game that left you speechless, that changed your life? One of the most interesting questions I think you can ask someone who's even remotely into video games is what video game had the biggest impact on your life? For a while, this question eluded me because I simply didn't know. Well, originally I thought it to be either the Super Mario franchise, but more specifically Super Mario 64 DS or Five Nights at Freddy's. On one hand, the Mario franchise was the first group of games I've ever played, with my first ever video game being Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES, and Super Mario 64 DS being one of my favorite games of all time. I've had so many great memories with this game. However, on the other hand, FNAF has had a huge, undeniable impact on my life, getting me into art and writing, introduced me to some of my favorite YouTubers. Good or bad, it shaped me into the person I am today. I too have had great memories with this franchise. From watching Markiplier's playthrough of FNAF 1 and 2, to experiencing the roller coaster that was the build-up to FNAF 3, to feeling the immense sadness of FNAF 4 being the final one, to Sister Location's fake cancellation, to FNAF 6's sudden release out of nowhere, all the way up to some not great memories with my fallout of the franchise after the awful release of Security Breach. However, I really sat on this, I pondered this for many moons, but to me now it's clear. That game, of course, being Undertale. As of uploading this video, hopefully, Undertale turns 10 years old. A whole decade. A lot of things happen in 10 years. A lot of scary things. Things change. People change. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same, especially nowadays with the world changing so much and so rapidly. It seems every day time moves faster and faster, and it's not waiting for anyone. But just because everything's changing doesn't mean you can't reminisce. This video will be just that. This video will definitely be more personal than any other video I've uploaded, just because of the nature of it. Undertale is a game that means so much to me, and I didn't even see that until recently, which made me appreciate it even more. Over the last few months, I've been playing Undertale non-stop, not only to get footage for this video, but just to revisit it. I did everything I possibly could. All 3 routes, all hidden encounters, researched all the secrets. I did as much as I could over these last few months. This game means that much to me. But how exactly did Undertale have such an impact on my life? Well, allow me to tell you that tale. But before we begin, go down to that like and subscribe button. Helps me out a lot. More than you think. It's free and it only takes 5 seconds to do. And share this video with everyone and anyone you can. My goal is to eventually hit 100k, so if you want to be part of that, you know what to do. With that all being said, sit back, grab a snack, as I diverge this very personal story of Undertale.
Say to you while watching the expert actor Dread.
Before this video begins, as always, I'm going to lay out the structure of the video. The way this video is going to work is, before we talk about Undertale itself, I'll go over a little bit about Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale, like what he did before Undertale and about Undertale before its release. After that, we'll cover each of the 3 separate routes, starting with Pacifist and ending with Genocide. And possibly at the end, I'll give some closing thoughts, not only about Undertale, but some also about Deltarune as well, as I have some interesting things to say about Deltarune. Also, one more thing, unlike what my other videos where I skip talking about more well-known knowledge, that's not how it's going to be for this video. Whether you're new to Undertale, discovering it for the first time through this video, or been with it since its release 10 years ago, I'm going to be covering Undertale as if you never knew anything about it, which means I'm going to be explaining some rather obvious information and fun facts. So if you came to this video looking for a fresh take on Undertale, that's unfortunately not what you're gonna get. This game means so much to me, and I want to do it justice as much as I can, even if it means repeating things already well known. With that all being said, it's about time we actually start the video, starting with before Undertale. Before we get into Undertale itself, we have to talk about the man behind the game. Well, the man who made the game. You know what I mean, jackass. Toby Fox, this guy. Being born on October 11th, 1991, Toby Fox is a video game developer and composer. As a child, he took music lessons, learning how to play the piano and trumpet. These music lessons are what got Toby into being a composer. However, that wasn't the only thing. Growing up, Toby had a deep fascination with Japanese role-playing games. Games like Final Fantasy V, Secret of Mana, and Super Mario RPG, and most importantly of which, Earthbound. Keep Earthbound in the back of your mind for a minute. Toby was mesmerized by the music and atmosphere of these games. Toby had always wanted to make his own game just like those RPGs. RPGs. One of the biggest inspirations for Mr. Fox was composer Yoko Shimomura, who had worked on the games Toby liked. Her contributions to Toby's work doesn't end with just inspiring him, but one of her songs called Megalomania, which may sound familiar, but we'll have to put a pin into that until later. Speaking of pins, let's unpin another one of our topics, Earthbound. Oh, sorry, I kind of pinned it pretty deep in your brain. You might feel a little pinch. There we go. Better? Too bad. Earthbound is a pretty popular RPG developed by HAL Laboratory and Ape Inc. and published by Nintendo. Earthbound was a game that left a particular impact on Toby, so much that he and his three brothers would go and dick around in RPG Maker 2000, a game development program that was used to make, well, RPGs, which as you can probably imagine is where the genre RPG Maker games come from, which yes, is its own genre completely separate to normal RPGs. Throughout high school, Toby would use this program in order to make ROM hacks, the most notable of which being the infamous Earthbound Halloween hack. The Earthbound Halloween hack was a more dark and twisted take on Earthbound, as if it needed any more of that. However, a little known fact is that the Earthbound Halloween hack wasn't Toby's first game, but instead a game called Aaron's Winter Quest, made 2 years prior. It too was an Earthbound ROM hack. This game isn't very notable, I only bring it up because, well, it's Toby's first game, obviously I had to bring it up in some capacity. However, something that is noteworthy about this little ROM hack is this is where we get to see a bit of Toby's humor shine through, with him constantly breaking the fourth wall. This would continue into his next work, the Halloween hack. While the Halloween hack is more noteworthy compared to Toby's previous work, it still isn't really noteworthy. It's a simple Halloween hack made for a contest that shows more of Toby's future humor and his composing skills, the most infamous of which being a song titled Megalovania, a song that you may know from Undertale being Sans' boss theme. However, it was first composed for Toby Fox's Earthbound Halloween hack. At the peak of its popularity, the Earthbound Halloween hack was one of the most popular ROM hacks for the original Earthbound. It was with this notoriety that would, in a way, help Toby get a big breakthrough, composing several tracks for the famous webcomic for the time, Homestuck, with one of the most popular songs being a little track called Megalovania. Yeah, Toby used this song a lot, but I'm sure we won't see it again, right? Oh, wait, I already spoiled that. Ah, fuck. After these two events, Toby eventually entered college. During his time in college, Toby started constructing some key components of his very own original video game. While at the time he didn't have a concrete idea for the game, he wanted to use his free time to lay out some of the staples of his game. Ideas, characters, and etc. However, one day Toby got the idea to implement a system where instead of attacking and killing enemies, like in most RPGs, you have the option to talk and show mercy. With this little concept in mind, Toby created a small demo to see how he liked the concept. However, that wasn't the only reason why he made this little demo. One day, on a whim, Toby was looking at Wikipedia and was reading about something called arrays. It's some code mumbo jumbo, whatever. He decided that he liked the idea of using this type of code for his game, so he tried to implement it with the battle system, and eventually all these little ideas came together. They all accumulated into one demo, being released on May 23rd, 2013. This small demo gave people a small taste of what's to come in the next few years. On June 24th, 2013, Toby would start a Kickstarter in order to fund the creation of Undertale. This Kickstarter was incredibly successful, allowing Toby to complete his entire vision of Undertale in only 2 years. Speaking of which, I think it's about time we actually talk about Undertale. Before we can start covering each of the 3 separate routes, we have to explain a little bit about Undertale itself. Being first released on September 15th, 2015, Undertale is an RPG that Toby almost entirely single-handedly created, doing all the programming, writing, music, and most of the art, with the exception of a few sprites that were made by Temmie Chang and a few other artists. Other than that, Toby did most of the work. With introductions out of the way, what is Undertale about? Well, the opening gives us a little bit of information. Long ago, 2 races ruled over Earth, humans and monsters. One day, war broke out between the 2 races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. They sealed the monsters underground with a magic spell. Many years later, legends say those who climb the mountain never return. From the opening, we learned that Undertale is a game about a small child who falls into a hole on Mount Ebott. Now, this child must find a way out of the underground, encountering monsters throughout their journey. Of course, such a very oversimplified version of the story, disregarding some of the more important nuances. In Undertale, there's two ways of dealing with monsters that you encounter. One, fighting them and eventually killing them, and two, sparing them and showing them mercy. This is what Undertale likes to call its battle system. Within these battles, or as Undertale calls them, encounters, you have four options: fight, act, item, and mercy. The fight option will bring up this little bar with a sliding gauge. On this bar is a few different colors. Lining up the gauge, depending on each color, will do a different amount of damage, with red being the least and green being the most. Perfectly timing the gauge to hit the middle of the bar will do extra damage, signified with a golden flash. This is the bar you'll use to wither down enemies' health bars, before eventually turning them to dust. Throughout the underground, you'll be able to find different weapons that, when equipped, will allow you to do more damage, starting out with a stick and eventually ending up with a worn dagger. However, the fight option also gives you the ability to beat monsters into submission. Doing enough damage to an enemy will put them into a mercy state. Defeating an enemy will grant the player XP in gold. Defeating them will end the encounter. The second option you have is act. The act option gives you a few choices that will change drastically depending on which enemy you encounter. However, consistent throughout each of the encounters is that each of the enemies will give you the option to check their stats. The stats provide both what damage and defense each of the monsters have. The act menu is mainly here for the pacifist route, as most enemies you have to deal with have you dealing a specific string of options in order to put them into a mercy state. Some enemies will have you do some more complex options to be put into a mercy state, while others will just have you do one or two. Sometimes during specific battles, the act button will also be used in order to progress the fight. The item option, as the name implies, is where your items are stored. Items like healing items can be used mid-battle to recover lost HP. The healing items themselves are vast, with some of them giving special effects, and some of them having special effects on certain bosses. And the final option is mercy. When an enemy's name turns yellow, it means they can be spared. Sparing them will end the encounter. Within the mercy option also lies a different option for you, that being flee, where if an enemy is giving you too much trouble, you can flee the battle. This will also end the encounter. Some enemies by default will spare you as soon as you start the encounter, while some others simply cannot be spared at all. Now that we have the battle system out of the way, what about the encounters themselves? You know, the actual gameplay? There are two parts to each encounter, one being the battle system and the second one being the actual encounter. After deciding what option you want to use, you'll be thrown into a little box. In this box contains a heart. This is you. You'll use this heart to dodge incoming attacks. After completing a volley of attacks from an enemy, you're placed back into the battle system, where you can then choose another option, until either you die or the encounter is finished. And yeah, that's Undertale's encounter system. These little basics established, I think it's about time we actually get into the routes themselves, starting with pacifists. Now to get this out of the way as soon as possible, the pacifist route is probably going to be the main part of the video. Not only will it be the overview of both the game itself, but also the story as well. It, without a doubt, will also be the longest part of the video. The reason why the pacifist route is going to be the overview of the game is because, unlike the other two routes, no one dies, and it's much easier to introduce people to each of the characters when none of them are, you know, dead. The neutral run is going to be where I discuss some of the more nuances of Undertale. Things like secrets, different endings, and much more. Then we'll finish off the genocide route. So, just a little heads up. Okay, now that we got all that out of the way, let's actually finally begin with the pacifist route. Like I mentioned, the pacifist route is going to be where I detail the story of Undertale, while weaving in little details that are important to each respective area, character, and whatever else comes up. The beginning of Undertale has a little intro bit, detailing the stories between monsters and humans. Eventually, a war breaks out between the two, where humans are ultimately the victor. After this victory, the humans sealed all monsters underground. Many years later, a child named Frisk climbs up Mount Ebott, only to trip and fall into the underground. We don't actually get the child's name until much later on, but I'll just call them by their actual name because it's, well, a lot easier. Upon waking up, Frisk is greeted by a flower that seems to be alive. This is Flowey. Flowey is an interesting character, however, I don't want to spoil anything right now, so we'll continue about him a little bit later. Flowey takes the liberty of welcoming you to the underground, and even teaches you a little bit about the combat system. This is where Flowey teaches you that the heart in the center is your soul, which represents you, the player, which might sound obvious, but the way Undertale tells its story is quite interesting. For a little explanation, you are controlling a character named Frisk, as we already established. However, the game doesn't treat you, the player, as Frisk. All you are is this little heart. The game never recognizes you as Frisk, only this tiny heart. Which is a bit trippy, I know, but that's kind of how Undertale likes to tell its story. It likes to be very, very meta with its storytelling, which will become more apparent during the other routes. Flowey tells you that your soul is weak at first, but can grow stronger with excess amount of LV. What's LV? Well, love, of course. The more love you have, the stronger you are. Flowey offers the player some love using friendliness pellets. Yeah, we'll go with that. Running into them will actually hurt you, and that's where Flowey drops the entire facade. For a lot of new players, this was actually quite surprising. The entire encounter with Flowey has been rather pleasant, from Flowey being a living flower to even the calm, happy music. It's quite an inversion of expectation. Then, Flowey gives you some words of wisdom. In this world, it's kill or be killed.
Kill or kill, but why can't I say that? Kill or be killed, Will. Kill or kill, be world, yeah! Prepare to die.
Before Flowey can finish you off, he's stomped by a mysterious fireball. This is where you get to meet Toriel, the caretaker of the ruins, which is where you are right now. I thought I should make that clear. Now, Toriel is also a very interesting character. We don't learn very much about her throughout the game, and after the ruins, she just kinda disappears. Toriel herself acts very protective, kinda like a mother, which landed her the name Goat Mom. Later on in the runes, speaking to her reveals a few more personal details, like how she yearns to be a teacher and that she really likes snails. Like, really likes snails.
I love snails!
So just keep that in the back of your mind, or else. The ruins are your standard tutorial area, where Toriel will guide you through it. Get it? Toriel? Tutorial? It was funnier 10 years ago. During your journey through the ruins, Toriel teaches you about a few different things. The first thing you learn about is puzzles. Throughout Undertale, there are many puzzles. Some of them are optional, while some of them are required to continue the story. For the most part, Toriel will solve most of the puzzles for you for this first area. Now, I won't lie, this section of the game is rather boring to replay over and over again, especially during a specific route. However, I've played this game so many times that it kind of becomes second nature once you play it enough times. You already know the answer to some of the more quote-unquote difficult puzzles. Eventually, Toriel will lead you to a room with a training dummy. Interacting with the dummy will trigger an encounter. Now, this is where you can kinda not really choose your route. Honestly, I don't even think this dummy has any effect on what route you take. It's more for training purposes to teach the player how the battle system works. However, depending on what you do to the dummy, you'll get a different response from Toriel. After familiarizing yourself with the battle system, you're able to move on into the next room. And I'm sure that dummy won't be important later on. This little tutorial also teaches you that depending on how you tackle an encounter, at the end you are awarded with specific things. Either XP, which helps you level up, or gold, which helps you buy items later on. Sparing enemies will not net you any XP, however it will give you a small bit of gold. The only way to get XP is to kill, but because this is the pacifist route, killing is not an option. Which means yes, throughout the entire route, you will stay at a minuscule 20 HP, which is honestly not as bad as it may sound. Well, maybe it's because I've played this game like 20 fucking times, I don't know. Eventually you'll get to a room where Toriel leaves you alone, except she doesn't, and she only goes to the end of the room and hides behind this pillar. She does this, as she explains, as an exercise to see if you are capable of being left by yourself, as Toriel needs to go do some important things. She tells you to stay here and wait for her to come back, as the ruins are dangerous for someone like yourself. Before she leaves, she hands you a cell phone, so if you need something, you can call her. Now, obviously, you don't do that, and you continue through the ruins by yourself. This is where you get into your first real encounter. These first few enemies aren't very difficult. They simply serve as a way to teach you that dodging is the only way to survive. It's not until later where you meet your first mini-boss, that being Napstablook. Napstablook is a pretty minor character, all things considered. He only appears a few times throughout the game, and once you leave Waterfall, he never shows up again. The fight with Napstablook is the first real challenge you'll face on your journey. His attacks are a bit more tricky compared to some of the more common enemies, especially this one. The attack pattern can be very random at times, which makes it very hard to dodge. In order to beat Napstablook, you have to cheer him on 4 times. Afterwards, he moves out of the way. Not very notable, but was still a pretty tricky encounter. Continuing through the ruins periodically, Toriel will call you to ask you a few questions. One of the most famous questions being what type of pie you like. You get the option between butterscotch or cinnamon. Now, your decision doesn't really matter as it doesn't change the outcome that much. Completing enough puzzles and making it far enough into the ruins, you'll stumble across Toriel's house, where she then tries to call you only to realize that you're already there. Following Toriel into her home, she then surprises you with the smell of pie and leads you to a room for you to stay in. You can explore the house a little bit more, but going to bed and waking up, you'll find a piece of pie sitting on the floor waiting for you, which I gotta say isn't very clean. How long exactly has that pie been sitting there? Now, the pie is very important, not only being the best healing item in the game, but also having a hidden debuff to a certain enemy later on, so it's best that you save it until then. Going into the living room, you can then find Toriel reading some books. Talking to her reveals that she's always wanted to be a teacher, which makes sense given her personality. However, asking her about the exit makes her a bit on edge. If you persist on asking about the exit, she'll eventually get up, telling you that she has to go do something. Following her downstairs, she'll confront you about wanting to leave, telling the player that she's going to destroy the one exit out of the ruins so you can never leave. She then tells you to go upstairs. Ignoring her warning and venturing further, she then tells you that every time a human falls into the underground, they always meet the same fate. They leave, they die. Asgore kills them and takes their souls. If you still continue, she'll give you one last warning to go back upstairs. Ignoring this warning, she then tells you in order to leave, you must prove yourself. Prove that you can survive out there. This then starts an encounter with Toriel. Now, this is the first boss, and because of that fact, it's not too difficult. This fight more serves as a way of seeing if you mastered what you learned so far. Well, combat-wise. However, a caveat to this is the fact that once your HP drops below a certain threshold, Toriel's attacks will start to dodge by themselves, avoiding the player entirely. However, Toriel can still kill you, but in order for that to occur, you have to purposely try and die. This is one of the only fights in the game where talking will not put an enemy in a mercy state. The only way to beat Toriel besides attacking her is to constantly spare her. Eventually, she'll give in, sparing her and ending the fight. Toriel's attacks, as I just stated, aren't too difficult, mainly using a barrage of fireballs that you have to weave in and out of a set pattern. She barely ever breaks this pattern of attacks, only occasionally breaking it to send homing fireballs. However, watching her attacks very closely, it's very clear that she's holding back, especially compared to some of the other bosses. Now, let's talk about her theme. Toriel's theme is called Heartache. To put it simply, this song is just beautiful. Like most songs in Undertale, it's meant to make the player feel something, some sort of emotion. For the ruins, it was a sense of curiosity exploring these unknown locations for the first time, but there was also a hint of comfort. Ghost was meant to be somewhat spooky. Enemy approaching is meant to get the player pumped for each encounter. However, Heartache is meant to make the player feel regret and sorrow. The song reflects Toriel's emotion. She doesn't want to do this, but you give her no choice. This is the only way to make you learn. It's great. Toby is so good at trying to get his message across, whether it be through text, visuals, or the music itself. He's a really good storyteller. While Undertale's music is very simple, only being a few key notes, the complexity in those notes are very telling throughout each of the different songs for each of the bosses, and Heartache is no exception. However, after sparing Toriel, she embraces you with one last hug, and tells you not to return. And once you enter through this door, you have another meeting with Flowey, where he tells you he knows what type of person you are, saying that you'll eventually get tired of sparing everyone and eventually turn into violence. As remember, in this world, it's kill or be killed. And that's the end of the beginning of Undertale. Cue the title card. Before we move on to the next area of the game, at the end of each area, I'm going to go back and give some closing thoughts before we move on. The ruins were a pretty decent tutorial area, teaching you the basics of Undertale's core components, that being puzzles, traversal, and the battle system. While the ruins does get a bit boring after a few playthroughs, it still serves its purpose well. The ruins show you all you need to know about Undertale, about its battle system, its puzzles, its humor, its meta storytelling. It's a pretty great tutorial area. It also introduced some great characters, with Flowey being a personal favorite of mine. Toriel I still think is a great character, however it's a bit of a bummer the fact that after the ruins she just doesn't appear again, unless you do a very specific pacifist route. Napstablook was also a character that I was hoping to see a little bit more of in the later areas, but also kind of dips after Waterfall. The enemies were great, all of them had great designs, the level design was great, the music was fantastic as always. Overall, the ruins was a very solid area, if a bit boring at the beginning, but very solid towards the end, and that build up towards Toriel's fight was fantastic. However, with that all being said, that was the ruins, and now we're moving on to the next area, Snowdin. After leaving the ruins, you exit out into a snowy forest. This pathway is actually pretty long, and as you traverse, strange events start to occur. First, a stick on the floor breaks behind you, then you see someone or something trailing you before disappearing, and arriving at this bridge, you are stopped in your tracks by a noise of footsteps in the snow. A shadow then creeps up on Frisk, and it speaks. "Human, don't you know how to greet a new pal? Turn around and shake my hand." This is Sans.
Ah, you've killed me!
Oh god, please, why? I'm heartbroken.
Just kidding, mate. The Bible was actually useful for once.
Oh, I love a bit of Bible in the morning. That's my favorite sci-fi novel.
Now, I know for a fact that you definitely know who Sans is. He's probably the most popular thing to come out of Undertale. Sans is easily one of my favorite characters. There's just something about him that makes him so endearing. Not only is he a pretty funny character, but he also knows a lot more than what he's letting on, which once you become aware of that fact during your first playthrough, you don't really know what to make of him. Is he really just a funny skeleton, or is he someone to be wary about? As the game progresses, this aspect of his character really starts to eat at you, but currently, he's just a funny little skeleton. Sans tells the player that he's actually supposed to be on watch for humans, but he doesn't really care about all of that. But his brother does. He's a human hunting fanatic. Speaking of which, here he comes. This is Papyrus, also a personal favorite character of mine. Papyrus too is a pretty popular aspect of Undertale, which if you know Sans, you probably know his brother Papyrus. Papyrus is the other funny skeleton man who really likes puzzles and spaghetti, well, and capturing humans. So one day he could join the Royal Guard. Papyrus is a character who changes rather drastically depending on what route you decide to take. While at first, his personality stays the same throughout this area of the game, once you move on to other areas depending on what you do or say to him, he'll change quite a bit, especially when you have an encounter with him later on. Oh wait, spoiler alert. After Papyrus leaves, but before you can, Sans asks you to play along with Papyrus's antics to, you know, make him feel better, and not to worry as he's completely harmless. Then he leaves. Welcome to Snowden. Well, kinda. Snowden is the name of a town in this area that you'll get to explore later on. However, the area is also called Snowden, which I guess is because the area is named after the town, as you start off in the Snowden forest. So I guess it's named after the town, or the town is named after the area. I don't know, it's not very important. Snowden is where Undertale's exploration really comes into play. The ruins were pretty basic, all things considered, with very few deviations from the main path. While Undertale's exploration isn't as detailed and complex compared to games like Amori. I've never played Amori before, but someone wanted me to mention it in an Undertale video, so yeah. However, exploring around the different areas and locations will net you a few goods, unique NPCs, and dialogue interactions. For example, when first entering the forest going up here, you'll get a fishing rod. Interacting with it, you'll receive someone's phone number. You decide not to call it. However, there's actually something more interesting about this area. Sometimes walking up to this area instead of going to where the fishing rod is, you'll end up in the sound test room. Now, this is due to something called a fun value, which is very important to Undertale. However, we'll get into more details about it during the neutral run, but to keep it short, the fun value determines what special events you'll encounter through your playthrough. Every playthrough will have different events depending on what your fun value is, but once again, we're talking about it more in the neutral run. Continuing forward, you'll eventually run into Sans and Papyrus again. Now, this will happen quite a lot before the final showdown with this area's boss. However, with this interaction, this is where the beginning of Papyrus's shenanigans really start. Papyrus finally finds a human and immediately challenges it, then promises to capture them so he may finally join the Royal Guard. So on my script here, I wrote in brackets, quote, in normal voice, unquote, to signify to myself to start doing the Papyrus voice. Thanks, past me, as if I was going to read the rest of the script in Papyrus's voice. What the fuck? Continuing forward, you'll eventually meet one of many mini-bosses in Snowden, Doggo. Now, this fight is rather important because it introduces you to the blue attack, which will be important later on. Other than the blue attack, this fight isn't too notable, besides it being the first mini-boss of Snowden. Meeting Sans again over here, he'll tell you that his brother Papyrus has a special attack, a special blue attack, and to be careful. And not long after, you meet with the Skelebros once more. This time Papyrus has concocted a little game, but when you first arrive, instead of explaining the game, he chastises Sans for being lazy, only to realize that you were there the entire time. Springing into action, Papyrus in spectacular fashion relays that he, the eccentric great Papyrus, and his lazy and apathetic brother will stump you using many puzzles that he and Sans carefully crafted. The puzzle in question is quite shocking, both figuratively and literally, as this maze was made with electric charge. Now, ordinarily, this puzzle would have been difficult to navigate through, an invisible maze that shocks you every time you take a wrong turn. It sounds like a lot of trial and error. However, that's all thrown out the window when Papyrus reveals the path to you. His naiveness will be his downfall time and time again. Now, to Papyrus, this is obviously not his fault, but Sans's, of course. Then Moon walks away. Sans thanks you for playing along and also reveals that the outfit Papyrus wears is something called his battle body. Cool. Running into the Skelebros once more, this time Sans has made the puzzle for you to solve. It's a word search. Papyrus is obviously not amused, proclaiming proudly that Junior Jumble is far harder. This then gives you a choice between Junior Jumble and word searchers, each choice obviously agreeing with one of the Skelebros. Now, this is kinda where Undertale's weird route system comes into play, where for both neutral and pacifist routes, you don't have to be strictly nice or strictly rude. You can still be a jerk during the pacifist route, and still be nice during the neutral route. And you'll get different dialogue options and choices depending on what options you pick and how you treat certain NPCs around the game world. Like, spoiler, after Papyrus's fight, he asks you on a date. Going on that date will boost your reputation. I know while nowadays stuff like that kinda seems pretty arbitrary, but back in 2015 it was kind of a cool system, and it's still kinda cool to this day, if a little dated. If you really want to, you can be a jerk to every NPC during the pacifist route. You don't have to be nice. However, if you want to get the true pacifist route, you kinda have to. Well, to a certain certain handful of NPCs at least. And obviously in the genocide route, you can't be nice at all, because genocide. That's kind of how it is. Anyway, picking Junior Jumble will please Papyrus and warrant another thanks from Sans. During the next save state, Papyrus has gratefully left you a plate of spaghetti that has frozen to the table because, you know, Snowden. Past this area, you'll encounter a semi-secret boss, that being Lesser Dog. Now, if you did any of the other routes, he wouldn't be too noteworthy. However, if you're doing Pacifist in order to spare Lesser Dog, you have to pet him a few times, and every time you pet him, his head grows. The thing is, there is no limit on how far his head can grow. Petting him for long enough, he'll start to pass by the dialogue box and eventually go off screen completely. It's not too important, it's just a pretty funny gag, which Undertale likes to do a lot of funny gags. That's not long neck gags. Ugh. And petting Lesser Dog enough will net you a little Easter egg later on when passing by this area. You'll see a bunch of snow dogs. The more you pet Lesser Dog, the more snow dogs will appear. Again, it's a pretty neat little gag. Anyway, after meeting Lesser Dog, you'll meet the second mini-boss, or mini-bosses. That being a pair of adorable little pooches. Oh, look, they're kissing.
What if we slaughtered them?
What the fuck was that? Whatever. Sparing these two will grant you access to the next area, where you can meet Papyrus. Now, this introduces a unique type of puzzle for this area, in this area alone. Each area of the game has its own puzzle type, and no other area has it. The Ruins, it had Invisible Past, and for Snowden, it has these tic-tac-toe-like puzzles, where you have to turn every X into an O. Completing this quite frankly insulting puzzle, I don't know why I called it insulting. You talk to Papyrus where he's befuddled that you passed his spaghetti trap, but more importantly, he inquiries about whether or not you saved any for him. Once again, you're given two options, which I believe this time around, no matter what option you choose, Papyrus will always have a positive answer. He's either happy that you ate it or thankful that you left some for him. After this interaction, there's another one of these tic-tac-toe puzzles. This is also where we get a little bit more character development from Papyrus, being rather friendly with Frisk instead of just trying to capture them. Now, fun fact, if this puzzle is a little too hard for you, you can always walk over here to this tree and instantly solve it, because it was just that hard. Anyway, after this, you get another one of Papyrus's crazy contraptions, this time being a machine that generates a random maze. However, each square of the maze has a different effect depending on which tile you're standing on. I would give you the instructions on what tile does what, however, when generating the maze, it gives you almost an entire pink pattern, which pink tiles can be walked over freely, so that's that puzzle out of the window, I guess. I'm sure this puzzle type won't come up again in the future. Wink, wink. Before facing off against Papyrus himself, you have to face a few more mini-bosses. Well, one mini-boss. Well, technically two. The first one being Greater Dog, another dog enemy. Sparing them is just as easy as sparing the rest of them. And the second mini-boss you may or may not encounter is Gift Trot. This boss is also pretty easy. All you have to do is take the decorations off them, and that will put them into a mercy state. However, within the little area where you encounter Gift Trot, you can also meet Sans. Nothing too interesting, except this is kind of where Sans' anomalistic tendencies start to become more apparent. When you first enter this location, Sans is standing right at the entrance. However, moving over here, he's there too, and going back, he's now back at the entrance. Now, if you want to be a little prick, you can install a widescreen mod and shatter the illusion. However, this is clearly trying to implicate that Sans has some sort of teleporting abilities, and this won't be the last time he uses them neither. In fact, he does it quite a few times throughout all the routes, especially during the pacifist route. Now, it's at this point you should definitely be keeping an eye on Sans, as he's not quite as he seems. In the next area, you'll have to face Papyrus's greatest trap yet, with only the tiniest chance of victory. This is the Bridge of Doom. But as you probably expect, the trap doesn't go off, as Papyrus has a change of heart. See, this trap would be too easy in defeating the human. Papyrus would rather capture Frisk himself, and with that, Papyrus walks off, waiting for you to confront him. Before leaving, Sans once again reminds you that you really want to understand those blue attacks, as he doesn't know what Papyrus is going to do. And this is where you get to Snowden, the town that is. Now, this is a cool little hub filled with festives, shops, and inns. Now, you can rest here for quite a bit, as passing through this area will trigger the encounter with Papyrus. However, one thing I want to point out before we talk about the encounter with Papyrus is this little shop area. Going in and talking to the shopkeeper her, she reveals some interesting details about Sans and Papyrus. When asking her what is there to do in Snowdin, she brings up the other areas you can visit like the library, Grillby's, and the inn. However, she mentions that if you get bored, you can simply go outside and, quote, watch those wacky skeletons do their thing, unquote. She follows this up by mentioning the fact that they just appeared in Snowdin one day and kinda asserted themselves. This is quite an interesting little detail, as neither one of the Skilla Bros ever get a lick of a backstory or anything else told about them. They just appeared one day in the underground. Now this brings up an interesting question. Where did they come from? Well, we're gonna have to keep an eye on them throughout the rest of the route to see if we ever get an answer to that. After you take your time exploring Snowdin, stocking up on plenty of healing items, and prepare yourself for a suspenseful encounter with the Great Papyrus, you may continue forward and start the encounter. But before this happens, Papyrus gives you a little speech depending on what route you take. Throughout each of the different routes, Papyrus will have a few different speeches for you. Since this is the pacifist route, we'll talk about that one first, and talk about the other speeches when talking about the other routes. If you've been rather nice to Papyrus, he'll start complimenting you for liking pasta and puzzles, and even says how it feels to have someone cool like you to think he's cool too. Except plot twist, he's not actually complimenting you. He flips the speech on its head by stating that's what you must be feeling about him. Papyrus then takes pity on you for being a friendless loser. His words, not mine, and declares that he, the Great Papyrus, shall be your... Before he can finish his sentence, he snaps back to reality. He can't be your friend because he must capture you so he can join the Royal Guard, and with that, Papyrus blocks the way. Papyrus's fight is a highlight of the entire journey. While it's not difficult or complex like some of the later bosses, it still adds quite a bit to the experience due to Papyrus himself. The boss fight, however, is quite lacking otherwise. All the bones are at the bottom, and you can float above all of them, making this fight very easy. Well, that's what it might seem at first. Trying to spare Papyrus, he'll warn you about his special blue attack, and it's just a bunch of blue bones, which if you remember, blue attacks can be dodged by, well, doing nothing. So it really does seem like Papyrus's fight is pretty... This is the special blue attack that Sans was talking about. Instead of being blue bones, Papyrus turns your soul blue. In this blue state, you are bound to the floor, compared to the red state where you can float around the entire arena. However, in this blue state, you can only jump. Because you can't float over the bones, you have to jump over them. Holding the up arrow will allow you to jump higher. This will come in handy because as the fight progresses, the bones will become taller and faster, even throwing in a few blue bones as well. Now, in my opinion, this fight is very well done. From the build-up of the blue attack from Sans and Papyrus himself, to the execution of the move, to how the fight progresses while in this blue state. It's very well done, making it easily one of my favorite bosses in the game. Papyrus's attacks are very simple, most of them consisting of moving bones of various heights. However, sometimes he'll start changing up attacks, having piles of bones, making you jump through bone hoops, having bones change height rapidly, and even throwing in some blue bones as well, which adds a lot of variety on multiple playthroughs. Also, his theme. Papyrus's theme actually has two parts to it, the first part being called Nyeh-heh-heh, which is a song that plays anytime he appears. And the second part being a more high energy version called Bone Trussle. If you listen closely, it's not too different to Nyeh-heh-heh, except from the addition of a very noticeable backing track, which might sound simple, but it does add quite a lot to the song overall. Papyrus's song is obviously meant to make the player feel pumped up, just like Enemy Approaching, and it does a damn fine job at it. Bone Trussle is easily one of the best songs in the game. It just fits Papyrus's personality very well, especially when it hits this middle part. just tracks pretty well throughout the fight. Now, to my knowledge, not many of Undertale's tracks are dynamic. Most of them just play out regardless of what part of the fight you're at. However, due to Papyrus' fight always being quite energetic, the song fits perfectly no matter what part of the fight you're at. Now, the name Bone Trussel, to my knowledge, isn't actually a word, but simply comes from one of the notes Papyrus leaves you. I believe this note can be found in this little makeshift prison. This little prison is where you go by losing the fight at any point to Papyrus. Instead of killing you, Papyrus will send you to a prison, which is actually his shed, except he made the bars way too wide so you can just escape and try the fight again until you eventually crack it. Now, an interesting piece of trivia I learned while making this video is Papyrus' fight actually has the highest amount of people abandoning routes. More specifically, the genocide route. Apparently, some people never make it past Papyrus, not because he's particularly difficult, because they don't want to kill him. Strange. However, if you do continue to engage Papyrus, he'll eventually warn you to give up before he has to use his special attack, or whatever that is. Persisting forward, he'll eventually try to use his special attack before a dog steals it. Now, fun fact, this dog is actually Toby Fox, so that's pretty neat. Well, now he doesn't have a special attack, he just has a boring and plain normal bone attack, which actually isn't, which is the joke. It's also one of the most unique attacks in the game, and surviving this attack will finally allow you to spare Papyrus, as he takes pity on you. At the end of the fight, you get another option whether or not to insult him or befriend him. Obviously, I chose the latter. However, an interesting bonus that most players might have not gotten is if you go into the act menu during Papyrus' fight, you have the option to flirt with him. Doing so will have Papyrus telling you that you can date him after he captures you, which you can do after finishing the fight. We'll talk about all these little mini side quests you can get a little later towards the end, as they'll become more important then in order to get the true pacifist ending. And with that, Papyrus' fight is finished. However, when finishing Papyrus' fight, he mentioned something about a magical barrier that seals all the monsters in the underground, and someone named Asgore wants to take 7 human souls to shatter it. Now, this isn't the first time we heard of this Asgore. Back in the ruins before confronting Toriel, she mentions that Asgore will take your soul and how evil he is. However, this doesn't align with what Papyrus says about him, describing him as, quote, a big fuzzy pushover, unquote. During the same scene, Papyrus also tells you in order to get through the barrier, you need to go through the king's castle. So now we have an end goal in mind. Then Papyrus leaves, and that's also the end of Snowdin. Snowdin was definitely one of the highlights of the entire game, not only introducing the Skelebros, 2 of the best characters, but also introduced some of Undertale's staples, like exploration. This is because Snowdin was far larger than the ruins, which was largely contained into a few hallways. However, Snowdin felt a lot larger, mostly due to Snowdin Town, which has its own community with different NPCs and businesses, which really made it feel more alive compared to the abandoned ruins. The enemy design was a bit lacking compared to the ruins. Not that they were bad, but they were a little less out there compared to the previous area. However, a few designs were really good, a few key ones being Gift Trot and the dog enemies. The music, of course, was very good, some of my favorites being the track Sands, Bone Trussel, and Shop. However, there's a few negatives about Snowdin, mainly having to replay it again. While for the most part it's fine, it's just a little bit annoying having to constantly redo all the puzzles. The fights with the dogs is also kind of annoying if you're playing with pacifists, as they take quite some time to be put into a mercy state. However, it's still a really great area with a great final boss. That all being said, we're now moving on to the next area, Waterfall. Entering the next area, you can meet with Sans at his second job. Talking to him, he'll ask you if you want to go to Groby's. Now, typically I would be saving events like this until after, as it fits more with the true pacifist ending, but this is an exception to that, as it's quite a small event. This also displays more of Sans' paradoxical abilities, walking to the right when Groby's is to the left, yet still getting there all the same. During this little lunch break with Sans, he does what you expect him to do: tell jokes, play pranks, touting his brother Papyrus, scratching his ass. You know, the typical Sans things, nothing out of the ordinary here. However, eventually he asks you something, then a tonal shift happens. A spotlight is put on you and Sans, and he asks you a rather strange question. He asks if you've ever heard of a talking flower, and with the word flower highlighted in yellow. Now, this is interesting for a few reasons. The first one being yellow text is only used for two things in Undertale. One, showing whether or not a monster can be spared, and two, words highlighted in yellow are typically important things, such as when Papyrus talks about Asgore. And the second reason why this is interesting is because, well, because you assume he's talking about Flowey, only for him to pull the rug from underneath you and state that he's talking about the Echo Flowers. However, this little aversion of expectations isn't just played for laughs. Continuing forward through the dialogue, he'll talk about how Papyrus, when no one else is around, says the flowers talk to him, giving him advice and encouraging him, and even sometimes giving predictions. While Sans brings up that he thinks someone is playing a trick on Papyrus, it's clear that Sans knows about Flowey, even telling you to keep an eye out, which if you do throughout several locations in the game, backtracking you'll be able to find Flowey following you around the game world. Sans knows Flowey is following the player. This adds on even more to Sans' anomalistic tendencies. He definitely knows a lot more than he's letting on. Perhaps he knows Flowey would try to influence the player, as if he's lived through this before, and after this little exchange, that's basically the end of the event. Which means we can continue talking about Waterfall. Walking past Sans' sentry station, you enter a rather ominous scene with deep shadows. Soon you'll understand why when passing by this tall grass. This is Undyne, the head of the Royal Guard, and her mission is to capture a human so Asgore can break the barrier. And I'm just gonna flat out say it, Undyne is easily my favorite character. Not only does she have the best encounter theme, once again, depending on what route you do, different events will happen. If you spare Papyrus during a pacifist route, he'll come and give Undyne his daily report. Papyrus brings up that he called her earlier about the human and mentions the fact that he fought them, but wasn't able to capture them. Undyne tells Papyrus that she'll capture the human herself. Papyrus tries to interject only to stop out of fear and tells her he'll help any way he can, and speeds off, and that's that. However, moving through the tall grass again, you catch the attention of Undyne. Now, this scene is really well done and is very suspenseful, especially with the harsh lighting. Undyne walks towards the edge and readies a spear, only to back off at the last second and disappear into the darkness. Well, that was very stressful, and apparently Monster Kid was there the entire time just watching us. Or watching Undyne more likely. Monster Kid appeared in Snowden as an NPC you could talk to, however he has a little bit more significance here as he appears several times throughout this area, and with that you'll let off into the area. Waterfall is easily my favorite area in the game, not only from the music but the vibe of the entire place and monsters that inhabit it. Waterfall also has its own puzzle type with bridge seeds. In order to create a bridge you must connect 4 bridge seeds. Now this puzzle doesn't come up a whole lot, but every time it does, it's quite enjoyable as the answer isn't always obvious. It's a fun little puzzle, especially compared to those in Snowden. However, I do have one gripe with Waterfall that I'm going to get out of the way as soon as possible. Waterfall is a really strangely paced area compared to the other areas so far, and upcoming ones as well. Story events are the only real events. Every time an event happens, it's always with Undyne, and progresses the story until you eventually face off against her. And because of that, Waterfall is kinda hard to talk about, because it would be me jumping to encounter, compared to the other areas where I could talk about the little in-between events. However, a little caveat to that is, if you're playing the pacifist route and spare Papyrus, he'll call you scarcely throughout. Most of the time it's trying to get details out of you so Undyne can more easily find you, which does open up for some great banter. The only other significant thing in Waterfall besides the encounters with Undyne is Waterfall shares a lot more of the lore than the other 2 areas did. Most of this comes from the signs you'll find on the walls, and the echo flowers strewed around the place. The echo flowers are pretty neat, giving some insight into the minds of monsters trapped in the underground. They talk about their hopes and dreams, how King Asgore will finally shatter the barrier, and they'll be able to reach the surface again. A recurring theme throughout the echo flowers is the wish of seeing real stars instead of the sparkles on the ceiling of the cave. While these interactions are quite small and easily missable, it does breathe life into this fascinating world, making it feel more alive. Seeing the dreams and aspirations of characters that we'll never meet is really good storytelling and makes Waterfall my favorite area in the game. In addition to that, you can find this little hub area with multiple signs on the wall that detail the war between monsters and humans, and just how strong a human soul is. In order to match a human soul, all the monsters in the underground would have to combine their souls. However, humans have one weakness, which is their soul, as it can persist after death, meaning if a monster was to kill a human, they could theoretically take that soul, becoming far more powerful, and this is what Asgore plans to do. With this power, he plans to shatter the barrier and set all monsters free. Riding this little plank, you arrive at another harshly lit area, where you can already probably guess Undyne then shows up, initiating a chase. Now, this chase is actually pretty easy to do if you take your time. However, getting hit by a spear at any time will initiate a little attack sequence where you have to dodge a barrage of smaller spears. Not only that, but this chase is pretty short, only lasting one screen. But afterwards you escape through this little patch of tall grass again. This game really likes its tall grass. Only for Monster Kid to save your skin, and with that, Undyne leaves. In the next area over here, you can get a cool little event. Talking to Sans, he'll let you use his telescope, where when using it, it shows nothing but red. However, exiting the telescope and facing forward, you'll be able to notice a tiny splotch of paint on your eye.
Fell victim to one of the classic blunders!
It's a cool little detail that adds more onto Sans' personality, and talking to him again, he'll give you a full refund, even though you didn't pay anything, so I guess he kept his part of the deal. Going through this little corridor, you'll meet a new character, Onion Son. He doesn't show up again after this little corridor, but he does provide a little bit of banter, and I'm sure he's a fan favorite character or something like that, so I had to mention him in some capacity. However, after that corridor section in a nearby room, you can find a piano. Entering the correct code or piano song into it will open a secret passage. In this passage lies an ancient artifact. It's an annoying dog. Using it will turn into a bunch of dog residue. Ugh. The fuck? Now, the dog residue can be used to grind out gold pretty easy by constantly using it, which duplicates it, and can be sold to an upcoming NPC for a pretty good chunk of gold. The next area is easily my favorite moment in the entire game. It starts by passing this broken statue, and in the next room over, you'll be able to find some umbrellas. Taking an umbrella and bringing it back to the statue will play a little tune. But that's not the end of it. Grabbing another umbrella and continuing forward, you eventually bump into Monster Kid, who decides to tag along with you. At first, Monster Kid starts gushing about Undyne, going on about how cool she is and how she'll help Asgore break the barrier. And this is where you get the best moment in the game. In the far distance stands the king's castle. On the ceiling of the cave, sparkles from the crystals shimmer like the stars, and you and Monster Kid are but a few minuscule outlines in comparison to the castle that towers over the underground. In the distance is your final destination, and you still have a long ways ahead. Every time I play this section of the game, I like to stand here for a while and take in the absolute beauty of the scene. It truly is my favorite part of the entire game, and just like that, the moment is over. Putting the umbrella back, you meet a pretty big obstacle, quite literally, as there's a ledge a little too high for you to get over. Monster Kid comes up with the idea to use him as a little boost, and with that, he says goodbye for now, and you're off. Up ahead is a bridge with more harsh lighting, which can only mean one thing. Yep, Undyne is back. This attack sequence is a little bit more tricky than the last, only due to the spears being a little faster. Getting caught by them once again sends down more tiny spears, but once again, if you're patient, it's not too difficult. Outrunning Undyne, you'll get to a dead end. Trying to turn back, you'll be cut off by her, and instead of capturing you, she instead cuts the bridge in half, and you fall. Real smart, Undyne.
Did you just cut the floor in half?
Yes!
Okay, not gonna lie, that was actually really dumb considering I'm at a dead end and you can easily capture me no problem at all, but now you slice the floor in half, I'm gonna fall, so screw it.
This throws you into a little cutscene of sorts, with an unknown character talking to another child who's fallen down. When they ask for the child's name, it's the name of the fallen child, the name you chose at the beginning of the game. Now, for convenience sake, the real name of the fallen child is Kara, which I already know a lot of people are going to have a problem with the way I pronounce the character's name. But it is Kara, as in character, so that's how I'm going to pronounce it, so cry about it, bitch. I'm gonna cut that part out. Cry about it. Before this character can say their name, they're cut off by a fade to white. Once again, the game comes back, and you wake up in a bed of golden flowers. You are now in the waterfall dump, filled to the brim with garbage.
What'd he say? Garbage?
In this area, you'll find, well, a bunch of garbage.
What'd he say? Garbage?
But you'll also find this training dummy just left here, and walking past it, it's alive. Of course it is. This is the Mad Dummy, the only mini-boss in Waterfall. Now, the dialogue can be changed ever so slightly depending on if you interact with them or not, and once again depending on what route. Now, the reason why this dummy is so mad is because apparently the dummy at the beginning of the game was their cousin, and once again depending on what route you do, or what you do to the dummy in the beginning of the game, Mad Dummy's dialogue will change. Now, the Mad Dummy fight is rather interesting, because they are a ghost. Hitting them in any way will not do any damage, and you can't spare them either. The Mad Dummy fight is one of very few where the only way to end the encounter is to wait out an invisible timer. When a certain amount of attacks go by, the encounter will end. However, there's a caveat to that. There's a bit of an illusion of damage being dealt with these homing magic attacks from these other dummies, but even if you don't hit them, I'm pretty sure the fight still progresses. Eventually he'll start bouncing around, and after getting hit enough with magic attacks, he'll trade out the dummies for mechanical dummies that shoot out rockets. These will also home in on you, and like the magic, can be used to damage the Mad Dummy. Eventually, these two will fail him, and he'll try killing you with a knife, which also fails. But you can't kill him, and he can't kill you, so now you're both stuck in an endless fight. Well, until Napstablook comes in and starts crying on him, I guess. This then ends the encounter. If you follow Napstablook, he'll lead you to his house where you can then visit him. Now, this section of the game is entirely optional. You don't have to go and visit him, but if you do, you get a few cool events. If you visit him, you can lie on the ground like garbage, getting this pretty cool spectral event. You can raise some snails, you can listen to music he makes, and on his computer, he's even browsing a music sharing website. This gives a little bit more personality to a character that barely even appears, which I really like. You can also get another cool event by leaving the spooky music on. Next time you have an encounter with an enemy, they'll be spooked by, well, the spooky music. Pretty neat. Another neat thing you can do is enter the shop and meet a pretty cool character. This is Garrison. He's simply a shopkeeper, and that's really it. I just really like his design. However, talking to him, he'll reveal some interesting information. Most importantly, something called the Delta Rune, which I'm sure will never come up again. If you've been paying attention, you've definitely seen the Delta Rune. It's the thing that was on Toriel's cloak, and it's all throughout the ruins in the rest of the area. It's an emblem that represents the kingdom of monsters. When asking about it again, he'll tell you the emblem predates written history, and recently monsters have been speculating on what it actually means. Most believe that the three triangles below represent monster kind, and the wings represent an angel of sorts that comes from the surface and will free them from the underground, while others believe that it's the angel of death who will slaughter all of them. Now, this is a pretty neat little meta detail. The angel in the prophecy is obviously referring to, of course, the fallen human, and the two different outlooks on the emblem represents the main two routes you can take, either pacifist or genocide. It's pretty cool storytelling. Asking about Asgore, Garrison, just like Papyrus, describes the king as a friendly and happy-go-lucky guy, and even mentions that he likes to go and visit the different areas and greet the other monsters, which once again contradicts what Toriel said about him. So is Toriel the one lying? I guess you'll find out when you finally meet the king. After completing this little light puzzle, you can find a secret area off the beaten path. This is Temmie Village. If you've gotten this far, you might have encountered a Temmie in battle, which basically acts like the other dog enemies. Temmie Village is filled with a bunch of Temmies. I guess it's some subspecies of monster. The Temmie Village is very weird, filled with a bunch of other Temmies. An egg, a statue of Temmie, and a painting. But also, don't forget Bob. You can also find a Temmie in a crack in a wall, which is a little ominous, and when interacting with your save state, instead of reading "you are filled with determination," it instead reads "you are filled with the Temmie Nation." Grand. Now, I get this all seems very weird, but Temmie is actually a reference to Temmie Chang, someone who helped Toby Fox with some of the art. And in Temmie Village, you can also find the Tem Shop, and inside is Tem. About Tem. They're Definitely a character. Alright, I'll be completely honest, I don't really like this character. I find them generally annoying. That goes for all Temmies, mostly due to them having a weird speech pattern. I hope that's not racist. All but one Tem speaks in some sort of broken English. I just find it annoying. Maybe because I don't really like gag characters. You know, characters that only exist to be the butt of the joke, or as epic lols random. Anyways, the Tem shop, as the name implies, is a shop, a pretty useless one at that. It's only really for selling shit you don't want, or Temmie armor. Temmie armor is completely broken, being easily the best armor in the game with 20 defense, heals 1 HP after every other turn, longer invulnerability, and 10 attack damage. However, the caveat to that is that it's expensive as fuck. First, you need to send Tem to college, which is 1,000 gold. Then, you get the option to purchase Temmie armor for a staggering 9,999 gold. This too has a caveat. Every time you die, the price drops drastically, and if you die 25 times, it will drop the price down to only 750 gold, which is really cheap for the best armor in the game that even comes with a warning that it may ruin the experience. Anyway, that was Temmie Village. Going back to the light puzzle beforehand, there's actually two of them, one being a darkened plains that you need to light up in order to reveal the path, which is where you can find Temmie Village, and the second one being this little cavern, where as you progress through this little maze, the lights around you start to dim, and the only way to turn them back on and keep the path lit is by using these little lamps, which I think is pretty neat. Both of these little light puzzles can be done without touching any of the lights. For the first one, the path is just there so you can navigate through the dark, and the second one, the path doesn't disappear, it only gets very dark, and if you know the path, you can still get through it. Which may sound obvious, but there's a lot of RPG games, especially RPG Maker games, that won't allow you to progress unless you do very specific things. A good example of this being Al Oni, Ib, The Strange Man Anthology, or really any RPG made by Yuri. Anyway, completing these two light mazes, you walk into a darkened corridor with a single echo flower, with the message, "Behind you," and it's Undyne. Now she has you cornered, creeping ever so closer. She then starts an expository. She informs the player that 7 human souls are needed in order to make King Asgore into a god, and break the barrier. She then gives you an ultimatum, either you willingly give up your soul, or she'll tear it from your body. Drawing her weapon, she inches ever so closer, before full-on charging you. Your heart starts to flash as if an encounter is about to happen. But before the fight can begin, Monster Kid comes running out excited to see Undyne and touting that you were lucky to get front row seats to her fight. And then realization sets in. Undyne then whisks him away. Returning to where you came, a path is now opened from the north. Before you can get across this bridge, you are stopped by who else but Monster Kid. He says Undyne told him to stay away from you because you're a human. I know I mentioned that you and Frisk are two different beings, but I'm not going to keep flip-flopping between calling this character the Heart, Frisk, and you. If you're an Undertale fan, you already know this, so fuck off. In any case, this interaction between you and Monster Kid is pretty cute, at least in this route. He asks you to be his enemy, and you actually get a choice if you want to be his enemy or not. Of course, it's played for laughs and not actually serious, but this is still a pretty cute moment. And that's basically the end of the interaction, and Monster Kid goes off on his merry way. Except, oh no, he tripped and fell, which is actually something he's done a lot. Every time you finish an interaction with him and he goes away, he trips and falls on his face. Except this time he falls off the bridge, hanging on by, I don't know, his teeth? He has no arms. Now, this sequence can play out a few different ways, depending on what you do. There are potentially 4 options for this little sequence. 1, you can go over and help him. Doing this, Monster Kid will defend you from Undyne before she walks away. The second thing is you can simply wait and let him fall, and continuing the trend of letting him fall, you can walk past him and go straight up to Undyne. Doing this, he will again fall, and both times he falls, Undyne will go down and save him. Doing this, Undyne in the upcoming battle will have some damage inflicted upon her from the fall. This is even mentioned by Monster Kid, stating that the fall did some damage to her, which of course is reflected in the fight. Now, of course, because this is the pacifist route, I of course went over and helped him up, and after he walks away, you eventually arrive at a giant cave. At the top of the cave stands Undyne waiting for your arrival, in a pretty sick shot. She starts her whole 7 human souls spiel, then she reveals that Asgore has already collected 6 human souls, and you're the only one left, as tradition, any human that makes it this far, she will divulge the great history of the monsters. But then she tells you to go fuck yourself, and she won't tell you the story as you're about to die. At that moment, she takes her helmet off, revealing herself for the first time to be a fish lady. Did you know people are attracted to Undyne? Undyne goes on and tells you that you existing is standing in the way of all of Monsterkind's freedom, all of Monsterkind's hopes and dreams, and that she, Undyne, will tear your soul from your lifeless body. Mate, I'm just trying to get home. I don't really want to fight the giant muscular fish lady wearing a full suit of armor. If you step forward, Undyne will descend upon you, starting the boss encounter. Now, Undyne has one of the best fights in the game, and her theme, Spear of Justice, is a personal favorite of mine. Once again, just like Papyrus, Undyne technically has multiple themes. A song that plays whenever she appears called, well, Undyne. Which is a totally unique song. However, there's a second theme called Nya. Which may make you ask what's the difference between this song and Spear of Justice. Well, just like Papyrus's Nyahaha and Bone Trussel, they're technically both the same song, except with Spear of Justice is a more climactic version of Nya. Spear of Justice is easily one of my favorite songs, especially this part right here. The song alone makes this fight feel really extraordinary. Just like Papyrus before her, her fight also has a gimmick of its own, this one being the green heart. As Undyne puts it herself, as long as you're green, you can't escape unless you learn to face danger head on. And she means that quite literally, as the only way to overcome the encounter in the pacifist route is to flee. After a few green attacks, she'll turn you red again, giving you the chance to flee. But how does the green attacks work? Well, you're forced to face danger head on, meaning you can't move in this green state. The only way to defend yourself is shielding yourself from these incoming arrows. Halfway through the fight, she'll throw in some yellow arrows, which shift to the other direction it's coming from. Now, the best way to think about this fight is, well, a rhythm game. Pressing the arrows in the right sequence in time will completely shield you from taking damage. Now, this fight is actually pretty difficult. I hadn't mentioned the difficulty that often, and when I did, I said it was pretty easy. But the pacifist route is actually pretty challenging due to the entire route you only having 20 HP, meaning you have to actually get pretty good at dodging, and later on in the fight, arrows become very fast. Undyne's fight is the first true obstacle you face through your adventure when first playing Undertale. It took me a good long time in order to beat it for the first time. Now, if you're playing the neutral route, Undyne's fight isn't very difficult, as you have far more HP. However, during the pacifist route, you don't have access to that luxury. On top of that, Undyne also has red attacks, which you'll never see, as when she turns you red, you have to flee from her, which isn't as easy as it may sound because she's faster than you, meaning once you flee, she'll eventually catch up with you, putting you back into a green state until you survive another volley of attacks. In order to finish her encounter, you have to flee a total of 4 times. On the 4th attempt, you'll cross into the next area called Hotland, which, because it's very hot, and she's wearing a suit of armor, and she's a fish, she'll eventually collapse from dehydration, which finishes the encounter. Now, you can either do one of two things: grab a cup of water from the water dispenser and pour it on her, or just leave her there to fry. Also, during your fleeing attempts, you get a call from Papyrus asking you if you want to hang out with him in Undyne afterwards, which leads to another mini-event later on after the fight, similar to the date with Papyrus, but once again, we'll talk about those later on when they're more relevant. You also pass by Sans, and yes, he's sleeping, thanks for asking. Whew! That was stressful, but after Undyne walks away, that's the end of Waterfall. I've already mentioned it before, but Waterfall is easily my favorite area in the game, having some of the best songs, encounters, monster designs, and boss fight outside of the genocide route. The ambient theme that plays over Waterfall, titled fittingly Waterfall, is easily one of my favorite tracks in the entire game. It's just very peaceful. Along with its side piece called Quiet Water. Which has the same melody of Waterfall, and by that extension, both Waterfall and Quiet Water have the melody of Spear of Justice, which again is one of the best tracks in the game. The puzzles this time around were kind of lacking, the only unique ones being the bridge flowers in the 2 light mazes, which honestly I think that's fine, as Waterfall is an area that's much more ambient compared to the high energy of the other areas. Truth be told, there wasn't much action in this area, which is perfectly fine. I enjoyed the area a lot more because it was more of a tranquil experience. It was very enjoyable to interact with the signs and echo flowers littering the place. It gave a lot of personality to characters we'll never see. Waterfall is just a very enjoyable experience overall and easily my favorite area in the entire game. And with that all being said, we're moving on to the next area, Heartland. After dealing with Undyne, you stumble across some sort of lab. Entering this lab for the first time, it's only dark with a small spotlight. In the lab, you can find some weird things, like this screen that seems to be following you, a very messy desk, a fridge filled with noodles, and a bag of dog food, which is very strange, and not long after you meet the monster responsible for this mess. This is Dr. Alphys, the royal scientist. Alphys is a pretty quirky character. She's very strange, but also very endearing. The general consensus for Alphys is pretty split. Either people love her or they find her annoying, and I see why, but hot take, I think Alphys gets way too much unnecessary hate. She's a very misunderstood character. There are aspects to her characters that people just overlook, that explains why she's the way she is, but we'll touch up on that later, as it'll be more important in order to get the true ending. When speaking with Alphys, she tells you that she didn't expect you to show up so soon, meaning that she was in fact expecting you at some point, and hidden throughout the game you can find, well, hidden cameras in various locations around the different areas, like Snowden and Waterfall, which she even admits to. She then tells you that she wants to help you, and with her knowledge, she'll easily be able to guide you through Heartland right to Asgore's castle. Except there's one problem. One of Alphys' creations is in Heartland. The problem with that is Alphys made a robot named Mettaton. She originally made Mettaton as a robotic entertainer, however, due to the recent events in the underground, mainly you showing up, Alphys decided to upgrade him a little bit with anti-human combat features, which is a bit of a problem. Alphys tried to fix this little mistake of hers, but she messed up and made him an indestructible killing machine that wants your head. But you should be fine so long as you don't bump into him. This is Mettaton, Alphys' greatest invention, a robot with a knack for fame and human blood. Mettaton is this area's main antagonist, as Alphys is on your side. Every encounter you have with Mettaton is in the form of some sort of game show, where the price for losing is death. Your first encounter with Mettaton is trivia. Answer each question correctly or die trying. Now this little trivia encounter is laughably easy, as waiting a few seconds, Alphys will just show you the answer, discreetly of course. Some of the questions are tricks or are impossible to correctly answer without guessing. The song that plays during these few Mettaton encounters is called Metal Crusher, and is in my top 5 favorite songs of the OST. It's just a really fitting song for the character, and its leitmotif is used quite a lot, which I'll go over in the neutral route. Well, that was certainly something, but before you leave, Alphys gives you her phone number and upgrades your phone, which will come in handy later. And after you leave Alphys' lab, you are thrown into Heartland. Heartland is a pretty strangely paced area just like Waterfall, where just like in Waterfall, mostly consists of different encounters with Mettaton, except one huge difference. Almost throughout the entire area, Alphys will constantly be calling you, and that's where she gets her reputation from, because it's very obnoxious, and it happens very frequently. Just like other areas, Heartland has its own sets of puzzles, and my god, some of them are obnoxious. Most of them consist of using these steam vents to traverse over gaps, or to serve as transitions between other puzzles, but for the most part they're not too bad until you get to a specific one, but we'll get to that when the time comes. The enemy design in Heartland is also probably my favorite set of enemies. You have such classics as Pyro TF2, Mount Vesuvius, and my personal favorite, 9/11, who, when dying, just casually falls out of the sky and blows up, and even has an attack where it drops a bunch of little boys on you. Little boys as in multiple of the little boy, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945 at 8:15 a.m. It's so dumb. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945 at 8:15 a.m. Anyway, the first trap you have to get through is this laser trap, which introduces a new type of attack. Before, we had blue attacks, where in order to dodge them, you needed to stand still. However, on the other hand, we have orange attacks, where in order to dodge them, you need to pass right through them, where if you stay still, you get hit. The only way to dodge it is, well, constantly moving, which is very important to know as you have to pass through this laser section, and wrongly moving or stopping will trigger an attack that will send 3 color lasers at you, either orange or blue, that you have to dodge accordingly. These appear a few times through Heartland, and they're never very intrusive or very difficult. And the next room over, you're introduced to a second puzzle, this one being, as I'm going to be referring to them as, the Space Invader puzzles. See, there's a big giant metal door blocking your way forward, so in order to open it, you have to solve these 2 puzzles, one being on the left and one being on the right. And in order to solve these puzzles, you have to hit the triangle on the other side. Problem is that there's multiple boxes blocking your shot, and you only have 2 of them. In order to complete these puzzles, you have to move the blocks in a way where you can get your bullet to the other side without hitting more than 1 box. Doing this for both sides will open the door to the north, allowing you access forward. Now, with these puzzles, there's a bit of a strategy, but honestly, you can just spam the arrow keys and randomly guess the pattern and eventually, well, guess the pattern. However, if you've played a few runs, then you'll be able to just correctly set the pattern up, as the pattern never changes. On the other side of this giant door lies a few steam vents, and on the other side of this bottomless cavern is a weirdly pitch black room. Alphys calls you and tells you that she can remotely turn the lights on, and when the lights are turned on, it's revealed that you're standing in a kitchen of sorts, and you guessed it, it's another one of Mettaton's game shows. This time being a spoof on cooking shows called Cooking with a Killer Robot. On this episode, Mettaton and his lovely assistant, which is you, are going to be baking a cake. Mettaton tasks the player with getting the ingredients for said cake, which are right behind you. Now we have all the ingredients to make a cake, but because this is Mettaton, he wants to add a special ingredient, the most important ingredient. Before Mettaton can Texas Chainsaw Massacre your ass, it's saved once again by Alphys. She brings up the fact that some audience members might be vegan and might not want to eat human-based products. Damn, I didn't know Undertale was so woke. Goddamn liberals, respecting each other's choices. Fucking pussies. Be a real man and eat meat laced with cancer. Shake my head. Anyways, Mettaton, being an inclusive killer robot, like a dirty liberal, okay, I'll stop, has a convenient can of Mettaton brand, always convenient human soul flavor substitute sitting on the counter over there. How lovely. I'll just go over and... Okay, first of all, wow. Second of all, the show is on a tight schedule, so if you don't get up there in 1 minute, Mettaton is just going to have to use your soul. But how do I get up there? Well, as you can probably imagine, Alphys is here again to save the day, again. Remember earlier when I said before you left Alphys's lab she upgraded your phone? Well, apparently one of those upgrades was a jetpack for some reason, allowing you to ascend the tower, which can only lead to national tragedy. This marks the start of a new encounter type with Mettaton. Every encounter going forward will now end with a minigame of sorts. I know the first encounter had you doing trivia and shit, but these next few encounters are different, actually having little minigames that you have to play, and spoiler alert, this is probably the best of the minigames. This little minigame will have you dodging the ingredients that you collected for Mettaton. Every time you get hit by one, it slows you down, which is bad because you need to reach the top by the end of the timer ticking down. Now, just like every other minigame, you can fail this. However, it's pretty easy not to, as it's quite generous. Most of the falling ingredients home in on where the player is, so it's quite easy to get into a pattern. And once you reach the top, Mettaton reveals that he already made a cake beforehand, so why did he have us do this? Ugh, whatever. What's next? Well, the core. You see that big giant machine in the background? Well, Alphys explains that that's something called the core, and is the source of all power for the underground. We don't get much information about the core itself, but one thing we do learn later on in the game is that the core was created by the previous royal scientist named W.D. Gaster, which is a name I want you to keep in the back of your mind for now, as it's going to be very important later on. Alphys tells you that inside the core is an elevator to Asgore's castle, which means the core is your next destination. Anyway, let's get back to those wacky shenanigans. Oh hey Sans, what's up dog? Well, hot dogs, as Sans is selling some, and if your inventory is full, instead of normally handing them to you, he'll stack them on top of your head, which means you could have a whole stack of hot dogs on your head. See what I mean by what's up dog? Hot dogs are what's up, and the stack of hot dogs can go past the top of the screen. Eventually, Sans will be frank with you and stop at 29 dogs, because 30 hot dogs is way too much. But 29? Nah. Nah, that's fine. His words, not mine. Also, you might want to be careful as moving the wrong way, you'll knock the entire stack of hot dogs down. Look what you did, jackass. A few rooms over, you get to a steam puzzle that I absolutely hate. You see this room? Well, in order to clear it, you have to get to the other side. No shit, Sherlock. However, every time you press one of these buttons on the floor, it will change the direction of the steam vents. Now, because I've played this game so many times, I know the solution to the puzzle, but the first time I got to this part, it was nothing but pure agony. If you're stupid like me, or you just simply don't know the solution, you could literally get stuck here for quite some time. However, once you do learn the solution, it only takes a few seconds to get through. The solution for this puzzle is to follow the track as normal, but before you get to the last jump back to the previous steam vent, then jump forward again. So when you jump again to the last one, it's pointing in the right direction. See, that's pretty easy. However, as I already said, it took me quite a long time the first time, even watching several playthroughs. But if you somehow manage to get past the section, you'll then have to face two Royal Guards members. At first, these two are only here to warn you that there's a human wandering around Hotland, and they will escort you somewhere safer. Oh boy, this is awkward. Eventually, they do realize that you're the human they're looking for, and a mini-boss encounter starts. Woo! There is some homosexual tension in this fight. Now, these two aren't normally very challenging if you're doing any other route besides pacifist, but because you only have 20 HP, their attacks can be a bit tricky, and they do take quite some time to be put into a mercy state. In order to spare the two Royal Guardsmen, you have to clean the armor of Guardsman 2. In order to clean his armor, you have to touch this green piece of armor a certain amount of times, and eventually Guard 2 will take his armor off. This is clearly bothering Guard 1, and in order to put them into a mercy state, you have to whisper to Guard 1. You tell him to be honest with his feelings, and Guard 1 confessed his love for Guard 2. Oh, that's where this gay aura is coming from. Anyway, they go and get some ice cream, and that's the end of that encounter. Definitely very interesting. And now we're in another dark room, which can only mean one thing. Yep, it's another one of Mettaton's game shows. This time being a spoof of the news. Mettaton has to play with finding something interesting that is, quote, newsworthy, unquote. There's quite a few different newsworthy things. There's a dog, a basketball, a script for one of Mettaton's upcoming movies, and a few other things. However, no matter what you pick, it turns out all of them are in fact bombs. Everything in this area seems to be a bomb. The dog's a bomb, the basketball's a bomb, even Mettaton's words are bombs.
A bomb factory. They're bombs.
This is another one of Mettaton's little mini-games, and in order to complete it, you have to go around deactivating every bomb. The deactivation process is rather annoying. In order to deactivate each of the bombs, you have to wait until it passes into a little square. Attacking or acting at the right time, when the bomb is in the square, it will defuse it. There are 6 different bombs to defuse, and if you don't defuse all 6 bombs in time, a bigger bomb will explode. Defusing all of them, you stop the bigger bomb from blowing up. Despite the fact that even if you didn't defuse all 6 bombs, the bigger bomb wouldn't have exploded because Alphys was there, as always, to save you from Mettaton's antics. This minigame isn't too difficult, as not only do you have a 2-minute timer, but all the bombs are in the same exact location every time, so all you really need to do is learn the pattern of each of the bombs. It's probably my least favorite minigame overall, though after this little catastrophe, a little quiet moment happens with Alphys. She understands that you'll be meeting Asgore soon, and that you're probably very nervous, but she assures you that Asgore is a really nice person and that you and him can talk things out. After this moment, you get to the spider bake sale, which flyers for said bake sale could be found back in the ruins. And if you had enough gold, you could leave some of it in one of the webs for said bake sale again. And if you did leave some gold in the spider web, you get a special little event for an upcoming encounter. The next room over has 2 more of those Space Invader puzzles, only this time they're a little bit more tricky, as instead of 2 bullets, you only have 1, meaning you have to clear the path completely. This is still not very difficult if you play the game as much as I have, which is to say about, like, a lot. In order to get to each puzzle, you have to traverse another steam vent section, which is not as annoying as the previous one, but still is quite iffy. Even though the Space Invader puzzles are rather simple, they are still probably my favorite puzzle in the game. The intuitive and charm lies within its simplicity, making it one of my favorite parts to replay. However, once you get past this puzzle, you enter a new area, a subsection of Heartland that, to my knowledge, has no official name. So I'm going to be calling it the Spider Den. Within the spider den, you can meet, well, a few spiders. Walking past each of them, the spiders will mention little things about a human passing by, how they hate spiders, how they love to rip their legs off and stomp on them, and worst of all, how they're very greedy with their money. This is Muffet. Now, ordinarily, characters like Muffet wouldn't be too important, as Muffet is considered a mini-boss, and mini-bosses aren't too notable, except for the fact that Muffet is the only mini-boss in the game who has a unique soul mode. Not only that, but she also has a pretty unique axe system where you can pay her to do less damage to you. But what about that unique soul mode? Well, during Muffet's first attack, she'll turn your soul purple. While in this purple mode, instead of being able to move around the arena freely, you are restricted to these rails. The purple soul mode alone puts this into my top 3 favorite boss fights. There's just something about it that makes it really fun to play. The feeling of weaving in and out of danger while restricted to certain rails really adds a bit of excitement that other mini-bosses lack. Muffet is, to my memory, the only boss who can be defeated in multiple ways besides fighting or sparing. The first unique way you can defeat Muffet is by waiting out an invisible timer, just like Mad Dummy, and another boss we're going to be talking about much later. This can have one of 2 endings. Either Muffet will come to the realization that the human the spiders were talking about was a completely different human, apparently, and decide to spare you due to this misunderstanding, and the second invisible timer has to do with the spider bake sale from the ruins. If you place gold into one of the spider webs, a spider will eventually come in and inform Muffet that you aren't stingy with your money, and in fact helped with the spider bake sale, which in turn Muffet will spare you. The other way you can end the fight is by eating any spider product. By using the spider cider or spider donut at any point during Muffet's fight, Muffet will spare you due to you supporting the spider bake sale again. Muffet's fight, despite being a mini-boss, is still really fun in my opinion, due to the purple soul mode, and that was Muffet's fight. Muffet's fight is really good for another reason. The joke is porn. And after finishing the fight, we're back to Mettaton shenanigans. How lovely. This time he's spoofing a play, a Romeo and Juliet type situation. Mettaton goes on about how yours and his love is forbidden due to the king needing your soul. It's honestly a really great scene that I'm just gonna play out for you. Easily another one of my favorite scenes. And after the play ends, you drop through a trapdoor into a dungeon. Within this dungeon is one of the color mazes that Papyrus showed you earlier, so I hope you all remembered those colors, because unlike with Papyrus, you actually need to get through this one. And this is the last minigame you have to get through, meaning it's also the last encounter with Mettaton, until you have to fight him. The song that plays during this section is a sped up version of the song that plays during the play. This song really helps with this moment of the game. It adds a very intense pace as the song comes to a close. Now, you can actually complete the maze, but once again, if you don't, as always, Alphys will come and save you at the last second. But even with the knowledge beforehand, it's still a really great moment of the game, and I love how unnecessarily dramatic it is. Despite being a small moment of the game, it's easily a highlight due to it being one of the only real stressful moments of this rather peaceful casual game. Well, until you get to a certain route. After completing this little maze, Mettaton is fed up with both you and Alphys, so he attacks. Now, you may remember earlier I stated that Mettaton is completely invulnerable, but don't worry, Alphys is here with another feature she added to your phone. A gun.
For his neutral special, he wields a gun.
You use it to shoot Mettaton and he goes away. Now, I want you to remember this gun as it's going to be a pretty important feature of an upcoming fight. After this encounter with Mettaton, Alphys opens the door for you, telling you that allowing her to help you really made her feel better about herself. This is another moment showcasing just how much Frisk has changed the underground since arriving. It's a very nice moment. Most of the other main characters also get a moment like this, and because of that, it's why Undertale clicked with so many people. Undertale is nothing short of a masterpiece in almost every department, besides coding, but that's besides the point. Now that the moment has passed, we enter the core, but before we go into the Mettaton Hotel, guess who's waiting for us? Well, who else but Sans? I know so far I keep bringing up how this moment of the game is my favorite, this and that is my favorite, whatever. It's why I've been bringing up these little graphics on screen to rank all my favorite moments, characters, songs, and whatever. However, despite all of that, this is easily one of the best moments in the entire game, and is widely considered one of the most impactful as well. This is the dinner date with Sans. The moment begins with talking to Sans, obviously. He tells you that he heard that you were heading up to the core, but before you can get there, he wants to have dinner with you. And in order to get there, he takes a shortcut. The shortcut is obviously more of his anomalistic bullshit. During the dinner scene, Sans speaks to you about how your journey is coming to an end and that you probably want to go home. Sans tells the player that he can relate, but sometimes it's better to take what's given to you. In my opinion, this is probably a subtle way of Sans telling you to stay in the underground. You already have everything you need, food, drinks, and friends. Is going back really worth it? And while this entire scene is going on, in the background a song called It's Raining Somewhere Else plays. It's a very beautiful song that fits with this impactful moment. And I know I just joked about me constantly saying this and that was my favorite, but this song truly is one of my favorites. Sans then tells you a story. In Snowdin, Sans' job is to watch for humans. That quickly gets boring. However, within Snowdin Forest lies a giant door. Sans started using this door to practice knock-knock jokes. Eventually, during one of his visits to the door, a voice comes from the other side. A woman's voice. Being the jokester that he is, he tells the voice a joke. The voice responds with laughter. Sans then details that him and his voice developed a thing where every day Sans and this lady would tell each other bad jokes for hours. However, one day Sans notices that she wasn't laughing very much. Sans tries to get her to open up and she does, telling Sans, quote, something strange, unquote. The voice on the other side of the door tells Sans that if a human was to pass through, the voice wants him to promise that he'll watch over and protect them. Sans was hesitant at first. He didn't even know this lady, but she liked bad jokes like him, so reluctantly he did. The voice on the other side of the door, if it wasn't obvious enough, is Toriel. She asks Sans to protect and watch you through your journey, which is why he's been all over the place from Snowdin to Hotland. However, he asked the player whether or not they know what he's getting at. If Toriel hadn't said anything, now, obviously Sans is joking. Well, it might seem obvious at first. This little scene will have a different impact during one of the different routes. During the same scene where Sans tells you he's joking, he brings up the fact that you've been doing a pretty good job and haven't died once. He asks what's the expression for. Is he wrong? Now, like most dialogue in the game, it can be altered depending on different choices, and if you don't die a single time, he'll pat himself on the back. Before he leaves, Sans tells First to take care of themselves because, quote, someone really cares about you, unquote. And with that scene done, you finally make it to the core. The core is a subsection of Hotland, just like with Snowden Forest and Snowden Town. But before you can actually enter the core, we have to make a stop at Mettaton's hotel. The hotel isn't a very important place, but is still a pretty cool set piece. While it simply serves as an in-between between Hotland and the core, it's still one of my favorite locations in the game. Just like Snowden Town, there's quite a few things you can do here. But fuck everything else, you can visit the Mettaton brand Burger Emporium and meet Burger Pants. He's a pretty fun character, however, in order to talk to him, you have to buy something, so let's do that. What do we have on the menu today? A Starfay, very popular food, a Glam Burger, also very popular food, a Legendary Hero, eating this during battle will increase your attack damage, pretty neat, and a steak in the shape of Mettaton's face, which is 500 gold. That is straight robbery. Now, a neat little thing with Mettaton's food is that using it during Mettaton's upcoming fight will net you a few cool little details. Not only that, but most of the items here have pretty decent healing, as 3 out of 4 of them can fully heal you during a pacifist route. Well, now that we bought something, we can finally talk to Burger Pants. What's up, man? And Jesus fuck that face. Like every other shopkeeper, you can talk to Burger Pants and learn a few things about them. You can ask about life advice, romance advice, and Mettaton himself, or just Burger Pants' future. Which, by the way, his name isn't actually Burger Pants, but the reason he's called that is because a bunch of hamburgers he had in his pants caused them to fall down. And also, this line. Well, that was certainly something. Anyway, Burger Pants lad, I'll see you later, dog. I got a core to explore. That was fucking awful. The core is one of the best locations in the game, in my opinion. It's just a bunch of different fights and puzzles until you eventually reach Mettaton. Most of the enemies located in the core are beefier versions of enemies found in the ruins, like Final Frogget, Whimslot, and Astigmatism, while also having new enemies like Magic and Night Knight, both of their names being puns. These new enemies also have some of the most unique attacks in the game, especially Night Knight and Magic, especially when you encounter them together. And in the pacifist route, these attacks could be quite tricky, and in fact the entire area could be a bit tricky, especially later on when you have to pass through this bridge. This bridge section has you completing 3 enemy encounters, one after the other. However, you can go back to your save point in between fights, but that just takes so damn long. It's not really worth it. Another interesting detail about the core is that as you progress, every time Alphys calls you, she gets progressively more and more nervous, even messing up when telling you what laser order to dodge, and failing to keep some of the lasers off. Something is clearly bothering her, which will become more apparent very soon. But eventually persisting through the core, you'll arrive at the top and come face to face with Mettaton for his and yours final showdown. Originally, you and Mettaton were going to have a fake battle where Alphys would come in and save the day again, as Mettaton reveals to you. Every time that Alphys has saved you from Mettaton, it's all been staged by her to make her seem like the good person she wants to be. Alphys purposely puts you in danger to seem like the hero, but that's not what was bothering her earlier. There's still something else. However, before Alphys can come and save you again, Mettaton changes plans. Instead of having a fake battle between you and Mettaton are going to have a real fight, real drama, real action, real bloodshed. And the encounter starts. However, there's a bit of a small problem. Mettaton is still invulnerable, and bullets won't work on him because, well, he was acting earlier. During the fight, while he's still invulnerable, Mettaton details his plan. All monsters you fought in the core were hired by him to kill you, but then he decided it'd be better if he kills you himself, in order to take your soul, not to give to Asgore, but to stop Asgore. Mettaton tells you that if Asgore gets all 7 souls, he'll he'll destroy all of humanity. However, Mettaton's dream is to be a star on the surface, and if Asgore pulls an Am and kills all of humanity, he robs Mettaton of his dream. So Mettaton is going to take your soul and stop Asgore. Alphys calls you and tells you that Mettaton has a weakness, that being a button on his back. So you just have to convince him to turn around so you can hit his button, and doing so will, well, I'll just show you.
Oh, yes.
This is the real Mettaton, and he is fabulous. Yes, he, Mettaton, is in fact a male. And after he finishes his transformation, this is where the real fight begins. This fight has a pretty unique gimmick. During the pacifist route, the only way to put Mettaton into a mercy state is to have his ratings reach maximum capacity. You can do this by a plethora of different ways. You can eat Mettaton brand food, you can dodge an attack without getting hit, and many more things. And sometimes you'll get a little prompt where you have to spell a word. Now, you can spell technically any word you want, but certain words will give you more ratings. Like spelling the word legs will get you a shit ton of ratings. However, the easiest way to get ratings is just by consuming Mettaton brand food, and that's why I said you should buy some from the Burger Emporium. The fight also has some very unique attacks, and even during some points in the fight, Mettaton will reveal his heart that you have to shoot in order to progress the fight, which I really like. One thing Undertale gets right is making every boss feel unique and special, which is something most RPGs don't even do. At the end of the game, Undertale is still introducing new features for the player to learn, and the best part is, not one single feature throughout the entire game overstays its welcome, which once again, most RPGs don't. The song that plays during Mettaton's fight is also a highlight, being called Death by Glamour. All of the songs that play during each of the boss fights are really good and perfectly captures what the boss's personality is, and Mettaton is no different. As the fight progresses and you destroy Mettaton's heart-shaped core more and more, pieces of his body will start to fall off, eventually destroying his core enough, he'll be only a body, and reaching 10,000 ratings will end the fight. Mettaton is obviously very satisfied with those ratings. The only problem is, because you destroyed his core, he's rapidly losing power. But before he fully shuts down, he decides to take a call from one lucky viewer, but something unexpected happens. This caller tells Mettaton how much he changed their life. Then more callers chime in telling Mettaton how much he means to them. This makes Mettaton realize that the underground loves him, and going to the surface isn't worth losing all of his fans. Humans already have stars, but the monsters don't, and he will be that star. Before Mettaton shuts down, he gives you some words of encouragement, telling you that you're strong enough to get through Asgore. You'll stop him and save all of humanity. And with that, Mettaton shuts down. Right when the fight ends, Alphys manages to get the door open. However, instead of finding you dead, she finds Mettaton powered down. At first, she's obviously very worried, but assures you that she can rebuild Mettaton good as new. And with that, she walks you to the elevator that will take you to Asgore's castle. The walk to the elevator is quite uneasy. There's a noticeable dread in the air. And once you reach the elevator, Alphys tells you something that completely changes the way I and many others saw the upcoming fight with Asgore. This is what's been bothering her the entire time. She tells the player that a human soul isn't powerful enough to break the barrier by itself. In order to cross the barrier, you need a human soul and a monster soul too. Meaning, if you wish to return home, Asgore must die. With that, Alphys leaves. The elevator ride to the castle is long, and rightfully so. It gives the player time to digest the information just diverged to them, that if you want to go home, you have to kill the king. It's a plot twist that no one could have seen coming, and it's executed very well. Leaving the elevator, you are greeted by a completely monotone path. This is the king's castle. A neat little detail that you may have not noticed is that when you save, it doesn't say you are filled with determination as usual. It doesn't say anything. It's a small detail with a powerful meaning. Throughout your journey, you are filled with determination, but now you have to kill Asgore. That determination is gone. The path to Asgore is as monotone as the path was from the elevator. It's very unsettling. There is no music, there is no color, there's only you and the path forwards. Eventually you arrive at a small home, similar to Toriel's, and the music kicks in. And the track that plays is called Undertale. This song is so good it sends chills down my spine. It sets the mood for the upcoming scene perfectly. Speaking of which, once you enter the new home, as it's called, you realize it's a one-for-one recreation of Toriel's house, except lacking any color besides the golden flowers. As you progress through the house, you encounter multiple enemies. However, instead of initiating a fight, they instead tell you the story of the underground and King Asgore's son. A long time ago, a human fell into the ruins. Injured by its fall, the human called out for help. Asriel, the king's son, heard the human's call. He brought the human back to the castle. Over time, Asriel and the human became like siblings. The king and queen treated the human child as their own. The underground was filled with hope. Then, one day, the human became very ill. The sick human only had one request, to see the flowers from their village. But there was nothing we could do. The next day, the human died. Asriel, wrecked with grief, absorbed the human soul. He transformed into a being with incredible power. With the human soul, Asriel crossed through the barrier. He carried the human's body into the sunset. Back to the village of humans. Asriel reached the center of the village. There he found a bed of golden flowers. He carried the human onto it. Suddenly, screams rang out. The villagers saw Asriel holding the human's body. They thought he had killed the child. The humans attacked him with everything they had. He was struck blow after blow. Asriel had the power to destroy them all, but Asriel did not fight back. Clutching the human, Asriel smiled and walked away. Wounded, Asriel stumbled home. He entered the castle and collapsed. His dust spread across the garden. The kingdom fell into despair. The king and queen had lost 2 of the children in one night. The humans had once again taken everything from us. The king decided it was time to end our suffering. Every human who falls down here must die. With enough souls, we can shatter the barrier forever. It's not long now. King Asgore will let us go, will give us hope, will save us all. You should be smiling too. Aren't you happy? You're going to be free. This moment is an absolute highlight of the entire experience, and it alone made me fall in love with this game when I first watched Jack's Undertale playthrough. It's as perfect as a scene as it could be. This scene also ties back into the one in Waterfall, when falling down from the bridge. The person who was talking to you in that moment was the king's son, Asriel. That scene was depicting Asriel finding the first human who fell, who is what you named your character at the beginning of the game. I think this moment alone is worth playing Undertale for. While it's not my favorite, I can definitely recognize that it's the best constructed scene of the entire game, and perfectly leads to the encounter with Asgore. But before you can meet the king, you reach the final corridor, where you are then met by Sans. Now this moment, out of any moment in the game, can be changed drastically depending on your actions throughout the entire game. If you're a good person, Sans will pat you on the back. If you're a bad person, Sans will call you out. It's one of the most famous moments of the entire game. It's suspenseful, and rightfully so, as Sans is a character that knows a lot more than what he lets on. He's been observing you through your entire journey. It only makes sense for him to judge you before the final fight. During this moment, Sans reveals to you that both EXP and LV are both acronyms for execution points and level of violence, respectively, which is a very clever way of diverting player expectations. You get execution points from killing monsters. The more execution points you have, the more level of violence you have. It becomes easier to detach yourself from the killing of innocent monsters. It's a clever toss-up of common RPG tropes, and goes to show how much Toby knows not only about RPGs, but also how to tell a meta story that isn't too in your face about it. Before Sans lets you go, he lets you know that the upcoming fight with Asgore will be the hardest decision you've made on your journey thus far. If you refuse to fight Asgore, he'll take your soul and destroy humanity, but if you choose to fight him, you'll have to kill him and take his soul to return home. And if Asgore dies, all of the monsters in the underground will remain trapped. It's a tough choice you have to make. Before you leave to fight Asgore, Sans tells you that he's rooting for you, and with that all being done, it's now time to face Asgore. When you enter Asgore's throne room, he's there watering some flowers. Noticing that someone is there, he tells them to give him a moment, so he can finish watering his flowers. And when he turns around, he realizes that it's you. He tells you that he wants to offer you a cup of tea, but you and him know what must be done. Now, if you've been paying attention to Asgore's voice, you may realize it's the same voice at the end of the game over screen telling you not to give up. This can mean one of two things. One, Asgore tells you not to give up so he can take your soul, or Asgore wants you to take his soul, hoping that you'll break the barrier. An interesting little detail. Asgore tries to make small talk with you, but already knows that the time to fight has come, and decides just to get it over with. He tells you when you're ready to follow him to the next room. Now, this is your last chance to go and do whatever you need before the final fight. However, this is also your last chance to get the true pacifist ending. And with that, I have to explain a few little things. First of all, like I just mentioned, this is your last chance to get the true pacifist ending, as if you choose to fight Asgore right now without doing any of the side quests, you will trigger the final boss of the neutral route. In order to get the true pacifist route, you have to go back and do some side quests, like the date with Papyrus, hanging out with Undyne, and visiting Alphys at her lab after the Mettaton fight. Doing all three of these side quests will give you access to the true lab, which we'll talk about later. However, if you do all of this and trigger the true pacifist route, you will not have to truly fight Asgore. Despite that fact, I'm still going to be talking about Asgore's fight here, as it's more impactful during the pacifist route than it is during the neutral route. Once you're ready to fight Asgore, he'll bring you to the barrier, but before entering the barrier room, Asgore tells you if there's truly anything you need to do it now, and he understands if you're not ready, as he isn't either. But once everything is said and done, and you're truly ready to fight Asgore, you enter the barrier room, and as you wish to continue, Asgore starts the encounter by revealing the 6 human soul containers, with an empty 7th one, made just for you. A strange light fills the room. Twilight is shining through the barrier. It seems your journey is finally over. You are filled with determination. And with that, the boss fight begins. Now, to get this out of the way as soon as possible, this is easily another one of my favorite fights in the game. There's just so much emotion in this fight, from Asgore's pose trying to avert his eyes from what he must do, to the realization that the only way to win the encounter is to kill Asgore, to even Asgore taking more damage from each hit as the fight progresses. Now, this fight can either be really hard for some people or extremely easy for others. Most of Asgore's attacks are slightly different and more difficult versions of Toriel's. However, he does have a few new attacks of his own that can either be really tricky or literally just standing still. Asgore's fight can be one of the easiest in the game if you know what you're doing. Speaking of Toriel, Asgore's theme is just a remix of sorts of Heartache, and even has the same leitmotif. Just like Toriel's theme, it too is a very powerful track, and fills the player with so much emotion. It truly is a climactic final boss. The music in Undertale adds so much to each of the bosses, and this is a perfect example. Your journey has truly come to an end. During the fight, you can talk to Asgore and lower his attack and defense. Same thing if you save the pie until Asgore. Eating it will remind him of Toriel, which once again will lower his attack and defense. Doing this, you can make him piss easy, but even if this fight has its flaws, it's still one of my favorites due to what it represents. Not only does this fight mark the end of your journey, but it also shows the player that not everyone can or want to be talked out of a fight. And that's something that kinda goes over a lot of people's heads. Something that really irritates me about this fight is not the fight itself, but the stigma around it. A lot of people misunderstand Asgore as a character. Asgore doesn't want to do this, but he has to save his people. Asgore destroys your mercy button not because he doesn't want to show mercy, but because mercy won't free his people or allow you to cross the barrier. Someone has to fall in order for one of you to prospect. Will you let Asgore take your soul, destroy the barrier and save his people and kill all of humanity? Or will you take Asgore's soul and leave all of the underground in despair? It's a hard choice you have to make. No matter what you do, someone needs to die. However, it's not actually that simple. See, upon striking Asgore enough, instead of killing him, he'll drop to his knees and kind of have a moment of reflection. Knowing he lost, Asgore laments about that day, the day after his son died. The underground had lost all hope. The humans again took everything from monster kind, and in a fit of anger, Asgore declared war on all of humanity. Any humans who fell down would be killed and their soul would be taken so Asgore could become a god and free his people, while also destroying humanity. However, in doing this, Toriel, Asgore's wife, and the queen left him, disgusted by his actions. She locked herself in the ruins, waiting for any human to fall so she could protect them from Asgore. But Asgore doesn't really want all of this. He doesn't want power or to hurt anyone. All he wants is to save his people and see his children again. In one last moment, Asgore asks you to take his soul and break the barrier. Then you get the option to either kill him or spare him. However, we're not going to choose that option right now. As I mentioned previously, doing any of these options will trigger the boss of the neutral run. So we're going to go all the way back to before the fight and do a bunch of little side quests. So let's do that now. The first side quest we have to do is the date with Papyrus, going all the way back to Snowdin. You may remember during the fight with Papyrus, you could ask him to go on a date with you. He tells you that you can date him after he captures you, but then he changes his mind and all that, yada yada yada, whatever, fuck off. Let's go on a date with him now. Going back to Snowdin Town and meeting with Papyrus, he's there waiting for you. Talking to him, he's a bit surprised that you actually came. He decides to take you somewhere really special, a place he likes to spend a lot of time at. So where is this special place? Well, he'll take you to it. Not even gonna question it. Anyway, once inside the house, you can officially start your date with Papyrus. Now, the date with Papyrus is a pretty unique moment in the game. First, it starts off like an encounter, but quickly transitions into, well, I don't even know how to describe this. Just look what's happening on screen. The date is a pretty chill moment of the game, having you do very little besides having you read the great dialogue from Papyrus. So apparently this is Papyrus' first time on a date. Shocking, I know. But luckily for you, Papyrus snagged a dating book from the library, or library. Great joke, Toby. In this magical dating book, it details how to properly go on a date with someone. The first thing you need to do is press C to bring up the dating HUD. Cool. Step 2, ask someone on a date. Papyrus, being the gentleman he is, asks you on a date, which you can either accept or decline. But because we need to complete each side quest to get the true pacifist route, we'll of course accept it. Which means now it's time for step 3, put on nice clothes to show you care. And if you have the manly bandana equipped, Papyrus will point it out as you wanted to show him you care. In fact, you've been wearing clothes all day, which means you must want to date Papyrus since the beginning. And yeah, sure perhaps. This is huge. Papyrus has never been bested at dating before, even though he's never done it. Whatever, but that's besides the point. Papyrus takes this as a challenge and he too puts some nice clothes on. And apparently he has some special clothes on under his battle body just in case someone asks him on a date. Oh, what the fuck is that? I mean, love it. Great job, Papyrus. However, Papyrus has an ace up his sleeve, a secret, and you won't be able to progress the date unless you find it. This then gives you a neat little minigame where you must go around and inspect parts of his body. In other words, you're exploring Papyrus's body. Careful, you might find his boner. Nope, that's a fucking awful joke. Anyway, his secret is located under his hat and not in his pants. Turns out the secret Papyrus had for you was a gift. Nah, I'd rather have the gift in your pants. Oh my god, these jokes are fucking terrible. The gift Papyrus has for you is, of course, spaghetti. If you eat it, the dating power will go off the charts, as Papyrus comes to the realization that you must love him more than he loves himself. And with all that dating power achieved, it's time for Papyrus to confess his feelings for you. And yeah, he tells you he's not interested. Wow, okay. Well, that was certainly something. The second side quest we have is hanging out with Undyne. If you remember back to Undyne's fight, you may remember in order to end the fight, during the pacifist route, you needed to flee a few times. However, during one of those flee attempts, Papyrus calls you to set up a hangout with Undyne. However, in order to actually be able to hang out, you absolutely need to pour the water on Undyne. If you do not, you will be locked out of the true pacifist route. But once you finish the fight with Undyne, you can visit her at her house with Papyrus. So apparently Papyrus has been visiting Undyne for quite some time, for, quote, extra private one-on-one training, unquote, which in reality is just cooking lessons. Okay, so I just find extra private one-on-one training a funny sentence. When Undyne opens the door, Papyrus introduces you to her and... yeah, this is not super awkward. No, not at all. I didn't almost leave you to fry. No, I saved you. Yeah. Anyway, she welcomes us inside, and Papyrus gives her a gift, only to disguise it as if we got it for her. Apparently, Papyrus has gotten Undyne so many bones, she has an entire drawer filled with them. And this happens. Yeah, thanks, Papyrus. What do you want, fish face? So, she seems a little bit mad still about earlier and refuses to be friends with us. Unless I was to make this about her. I could trick her into being my friend. Then Papyrus comes in and says Undyne isn't up to the challenge to be our friend. Undyne being... well, Undyne is obviously offended by this notion and decides that she will be a friend. She's not just gonna be your friend, but your best friend. This triggers Undyne into being really nice, offering you a drink, but instead of you getting what you want, she insists that she'll get it for you. She even goes as far as throwing a spear at you. And that's how you pick a drink. You can pick between tea, the blatantly correct choice, hot chocolate, soda, or sugar, or if you want, you can point it at Undyne and get this unique interaction. During this little hangout with Undyne, you really get a feel for her character, going from this intimidating knight to someone who just likes to kid around. She even goes into a little bit about her childhood, and how she wanted to prove that she was the strongest kid. She challenged Asgore to a fight. She couldn't even hit him, and the entire time he never fought back. Feeling bad about herself, Asgore comforts her and begins to train her. During one of her training sessions, she manages to knock Asgore down, and he was proud of her. She eventually became head of the Royal Guard, and now she trains people like Undyne. But she relays that she doesn't want to let Papyrus into the Royal Guard, not because he's weak, but because he's too nice and innocent. Instead of training him to fight, she trains him how to cook. She then realizes Papyrus was meant to be here to have his cooking lessons. However, he's not here, so now you must take his place. This is also a highlight of the pacifist route due to just how batshit crazy it is. It's a little collection of mini games. First, we have to pulverize these vegetables. Then we have to add and stir the pasta. Finally, we have to turn the heat up, and Undyne really wants us to turn the heat up, and pushes us further and further until the house sets on fire in a giant fiery explosion. And with that, Undyne realizes that she really screwed the pooch, and comes to the conclusion that if you're not friends, then you're enemies, which starts a semi-encounter. It's kind of a fake out, but not really. No matter what option you choose, you always end up doing 1 damage to Undyne. And with that, she realizes that you don't want to hurt her, and she doesn't want to hurt you, and you two become friends. And that was the end of hanging out with Undyne. Now that that's done, we have one last side quest before going back to Asgore. The last side quest is a date with Alphys. The way you get the side quest is going back to Papyrus' house where he and Undyne are there. Talking to Undyne, she gives you a note to drop off at Alphys' lab, and if you open it, she says she's gonna kill you, so obviously I opened it right in front of her. Going to Heartland and visiting Alphys' lab, sliding it under the door, Alphys will pick it up and come out. Seeing you there, she assumes that you wrote the letter. After some self-pity, the date starts, and Alphys comes out wearing a dress. How nice. She also has some gifts for you that she was saving for a moment like this. First, she has some metal armor polish. Thanks, I think I can use this for my Temi armor. Next, she has waterproof cream for scales. I don't really have scales, but whatever. And lastly, she has a magic spear repair kit, which I don't have neither. Wait, metal armor polish, waterproof cream for scales, magic spear repair kit? That's all stuff that my Uncle Giuseppe likes. Damn, I missed that guy. No, I'm just kidding. My Uncle Vladimir likes that stuff.
Vladimir?
No, to be serious, this is obviously things for Undyne, meaning yes, Alphys is interested in Undyne. Anyway, she then takes you to the most romantic place ever, the dump. Apparently her and Undyne come here all the time. Cool, I guess. Speaking of Undyne, here she comes now. Alphys starts to panic as Undyne can't see her on a date with you, as Alphys clearly has feelings for Undyne, so Alphys hides behind a trash can. Then Undyne comes and tells you that delivering the note was a bad idea and that she'll do it herself. Now obviously you don't have the letter as you already delivered it, so she gets a little upset, but asks you if you've seen Alphys or not. You of course get a choice, picking either or will trigger a different response from Undyne. Either way, she'll pass by and Alphys will return from behind a trash can. This is where Alphys confessed her feelings for Undyne, then asks you to roleplay. If you do, there's just this really awkward part where Alphys starts spilling her guts about Undyne, which would be cute if it wasn't for the fact that Undyne was standing there the entire time and overheard everything. So now Alphys is forced to confront Undyne about it. Anyway, they go on about some anime or something, yada yada yada, anime is real, Papyrus shows up, and that's the end of the date with Alphys.
Why are the lesbians underground? They're only supposed to be underground if they're in my basement!
Now, I actually lied a little bit about this being the final side quest. You actually have to do one more that triggers after completing the other 3. Going back to Alphys' lab, you'll find a note on the floor from, well, Alphys. The note is from Alphys where she thanks you for helping her become more confident, but her problems aren't just gonna go away by you being there, and she has to face her own mistakes. If you want to know the truth, enter the door to the north of the note. On the other side of this door, it's actually an elevator. Using the elevator, you start to descend. The elevator stops, malfunctions, then plummets downward. Welcome to the True Lab. Easily the darkest Undertale has to offer. This is where a lot of disturbing things are revealed, from horrible abominations created by Alphys to the abstraction of determination, and even a possible explanation on how Flowey came to be. All things shown in the True Lab. So let's tackle it all piece by piece and one at a time. Traversing through the True Lab for the first time is easily the most unsettling Undertale gets. While there was a few disturbing moments sprinkled throughout Undertale, the True Lab is easily the most. Let's start with the entries you'll find scattered throughout the lab. Most of these entries detail how Asgore tasked Alphys to experiment with determination to help free the monsters from the underground. Alphys eventually comes to the conclusion that determination can make a person's soul persist even after death. Alphys then takes a flower from Asgore's garden, but we'll get back to that in a moment. The entries then go on to explain that several monsters were brought in to test the elements of determination. However, this goes awry. None of the monsters have turned to dust, which is a bit of a problem as Alphys tells the family of the monsters that the dust would be sent back to them for their funerals. The experiments are failures after another. It seems like injecting determination into a monster's body doesn't work the same as with humans. See, Alphys had gotten monsters that had fallen down, in other words, had died. Her experiments were injecting determination into these dead monsters to see if they would persist after death like the humans would. It didn't work, so she kept injecting more determination until eventually one of the bodies opened their eyes. Entry number 14, everyone that had fallen down has woken up. They're all walking around and talking like nothing's wrong. I thought they were all goners. Entry number 15. Seems like this research was a dead end, but at least we got a happy ending out of it. I sent the souls back to Asgore. We returned the vessels to his garden, and I called all the families and told them everyone's alive. I'll send them back tomorrow. Smiley face. Entry number 16. No. Unused entry number 17. Monsters' physical forms can't handle determination like humans can. With too much determination, our bodies begin to break down. Everyone's melted together. Entry number 18. The flower is gone. Entry number 19. The families keep calling me to ask when everyone's coming home. What am I supposed to say? I don't even answer the phone anymore. Entry number 20. Asgore left me 5 messages today. 4 being about everyone being angry, 1 about this cute teacup he found that looks like me. Thanks, Asgore. Entry number 21. I spent all my time at the garbage dump. Now it's my element. And that was the final entry. These entries paint a very disturbing photo. Alphys tried experimenting with determination on monsters that had already died. While they did come back from the dead, it had an unintended side effect. That being, monsters started to melt and break down, even starting to fuse with one another. Now that would be disturbing alone, however you actually get to meet each of the monsters that Alphys experimented on, being called the Amalgamates. And each of them have some of the creepiest designs in non-horror games. Paired with the horrifying music, it adds a very unsettling atmosphere to every encounter and every moment throughout the True Lab. There's something not a lot of people talk about that makes the existence of the True Lab really disturbing. However, it doesn't happen in the pacifist route, it happens in a neutral route, and it pertains to Alphys herself. In some neutral endings after killing Metaton, it's implied that Alphys committed suicide in the True Lab. Besides the implications of her taking her own life, it's disturbing because it's a result of the guilt of what she did to the Amalgamates. And unlike with the pacifist route where you help her get over it, you don't do that in a neutral route, because you can't access the True Lab, meaning in some runs of Undertale, Alphys is doomed to take her own life, and you can't do anything about it, because you're locked out of a true pacifist route. It's a very disturbing moment that can occur that adds onto this already uneasy experience. Throughout the True Lab, you'll encounter each of the Amalgamates, which will thrust you into an encounter with each of them. The True Lab is filled with both disturbing events and pretty elaborate puzzles that you have to solve in order to escape, as the elevator that took you here is broken, meaning you're stuck down here. And once you learn that the Amalgamates are roaming freely down here, it definitely adds a lot of dread throughout your journey of the True Lab. The True Lab is also another highlight of Undertale. It's just such a unique experience compared to the rest of the game. As you explore the True Lab collecting each of the colored keys, you encounter some of the different Amalgamates. Some of them will throw you into an encounter, and some of them will just be creepy little events. Easily the creepiest and the one that actually scared me as a kid is this one. There's also this bed one that tucks you in, which is actually rather cute. Each of the different Amalgamates you encounter all have very unsettling fights, from the music to the designs to even the attacks. The Amalgamates are some of the most memorable fights in the entire game, and easily one of the worst parts is you can't even put them out of their misery, as attacking won't do anything to them. Each of the different fights with the Amalgamates also have some unique attacks that no other enemies have, and some of them are downright unsettling, especially this one called Reaper Bird, which has an attack with this little guy called Every Man having his face eaten by flies. What's even creepier about these Amalgamates is that you can see what monsters they consist of. This is reflected even more within their act options, being a combination of each of the monsters fused into one's act options. On the plus side, it seems whenever you put an Amalgamate into a mercy state, you help them remember who they are. And after collecting all 4 colored keys, you now have access to the generator that controls the elevator power. However, at this moment, you are cornered by all the Amalgamates before Alphys comes in and saves you. Turns out they get a bit feisty when they're not fed on time, which is what the dog food upstairs is used for, to feed the Amalgamates. And with that, that also ends the True Lab. Easily one of my favorite areas in the entire game. From the atmosphere to the enemy design to even the limited amount of music. I think it's all fantastic. However, now that we completed all the side quests, it's time to return to Asgore so we can achieve the true pacifist ending. After completing all the side quests, it's now time to return to Asgore. However, this time instead of initiating a fight, a fireball comes in and strikes him. A fireball that should seem rather familiar. That's right, it's Goat Mom. Toriel gives an identical speech to Asgore as she did with Flowey. Toriel doesn't want you to kill another creature, and as terrible as Asgore is in her eyes, even he deserves mercy. And then the big man himself chimes in. This is where we get the fact that Toriel is the former queen of the underground. No, not really, as if you went exploring in the True Lab, you would have found a bunch of tapes made by Toriel, Asgore, Azrael, and Chara, the first fallen human. Anyway, Toriel spits absolute venom at Asgore, and now he's sad. Then Undyne comes in, trying to stop a fight that's not even happening. Then we get an interaction between Undyne and Toriel, which is cool, and not long after, Alphys comes in and again tries to stop a fight that's not even happening. Again, that isn't happening. Another interaction between these two characters that never met happens. Cool, great, grand. Now, Papyrus is here too, telling everyone not to fight. And if anyone fights, he'll be forced to get Undyne to stop them. More interactions between more characters who've never interacted. It's already crazy out here. What can make it even crazier? Is that fucking Sans Undertale? Now he's flirting with Toriel. What the fuck is this? Alright, now all the characters that you met throughout your journey are now together, and we have some fun banter. Sans and Toriel finally meet, and Papyrus is not amused at the puns. Then Alphys and Undyne start getting lovey-dovey, so the Chad Metaton tells them to just kiss already, and they go for it before being stopped by Toriel because, don't do that shit in front of me.
I make it hard.
Basement!
Now your adventure has come to an end, and the last thing you get is one last moment with all the friends you've made on your journey, and that's the end of Undertale. Except no, it's not the end. Alphys brings up the fact that Papyrus is the one who called everyone here. But why? Well, Papyrus explains that, quote, a small flower helped me, unquote. While everyone was distracted, Flowey snuck in and stole all 6 human souls, giving him godlike power. And as Flowey puts it, the best part is, it's you, the player's fault. You made them love you. Flowey tells you the reason why he's doing all this is because if you leave the underground, you win the game, and leave him behind. He can't have that, so yours and his game will last forever. Even trapping you in a small box, constantly pelting you with pellets until you reach 1 HP. And before he can finish you off, every time Flowey tries to attack you, one of your friends will stop him and give you words of encouragement, telling you not to give up and that you can still win against Flowey. You have to stay determined. Then more monsters come in and cheer you on, and just as it looks like Flowey's about to lose, and with that, Flowey absorbs all the souls of the monsters in the underground using the 6 human souls, which starts the final boss of the true pacifist route. It's the end. Now, to be completely honest, I don't really like this fight. Not only are the attacks kind of bullshit at times, but one of the biggest caveats of the entire fight is that you've come so far, you physically can't lose. You don't die. When you do, you get the message, but it refused and come back. It's another one of those fights with an invisible timer. You'll have to wait out a certain amount of attacks before you can progress through the fight. However, this fight does have a unique gimmick in that being hoping and dreaming. Hoping will reduce the damage taken from the next attack, and dreaming will fill your inventory with dreams that will fill your HP to max. Asriel explains that his end goal is to erase this timeline, so that your friends will forget everything, which includes you. The reason why Asriel wants to reset everything is because he doesn't want you to leave. However, the catch is, Asriel still thinks you're Kara, the first fallen human, which obviously you aren't, you're Frisk. Or the character is Frisk. Whatever, same, you know what the fuck I mean. If you win, you leave him behind, so he'll reset the timeline to keep you there forever. In my opinion, this is kind of an iffy moment. While a lot of people tout Asriel's fight as a highlight, I honestly think it's one of my least favorite moments in the entire game. It's not a bad fight per se, but it's just not as good of a final boss as the other two final bosses are. And in a way, it feels very lackluster, especially because, again, you can't really die. Once you come back, you just have to do 3 basic attacks before you can progress the fight. Even further, the attacks themselves are pretty easy to learn, so if you can learn the pattern, it becomes very easy, especially compared to the other two routes final bosses. Asriel has a pretty cool design, if I'm being honest, same thing with the background. It was pretty fun to draw both of them. A plus is, his song is one of the best in the OST. Other than that, the first phase of Asriel's fight is very underwhelming. It was kind of a turn-off for me personally to replay the pacifist route again after the first time. Well, besides, you know, recording because obviously dumbass. However, like I just said, this was only phase 1. What about phase 2? Well, progressing the fight long enough, the dialogue box will say Asriel readies Hypergorna, which will prompt Asriel to try to destroy the timeline using this big fucker. And surprised that you still persist after that attack, he then uses super stretchy fat man attack, and now he's even gayer. Anyway, again, dying here doesn't really matter as you always persist after death. Now, this is an in-between phase, as he'll keep attacking you until his dialogue runs out, before moving to the next phase. During this phase, Asriel tells you that every time you die, your grip on this world slips more and more, and eventually you'll forget everything and everyone, before he traps you into, well, darkness. You struggle, nothing happens. You try to reach a save point, nothing happens. Seems like saving the game really is impossible. However, with what little power you do have left, you can save someone else. And with this, the real phase 2 begins. This phase consists of going through each of the characters you befriended and helping them remember who they are before they completely forget. You'll have to tackle Undyne, Alphys, Papyrus, Sans, Toriel, and Asgore. As you encounter each of the Lost Souls, as the game calls them, they revert to their base personalities as they were when you first met them. Using enough act options on each of the Lost Souls, they will eventually break out of their trance, weakening Asriel. And when everyone else is saved, there's only one person left to save, which is Asriel himself. Doing this will then give you a little cutscene of when Asriel first met the first fallen human. As you persist more and more, Asriel's attacks will become easier and eventually will start dodging by themselves as Toriel's did. Asriel then tells you that he's doing this all for Kara. They're the only ones he cares about, and he's not ready to say goodbye to Kara again. He doesn't want to be alone, so just let him win. Blasting you with the gay laser, your health will start to deplete, but will never drop to 0, until you can finally show Asriel mercy. This is where we actually get Asriel as he was before he died. He realizes that you're not Kara, and this is also where we get Frisk's actual name. But I already told you that at the beginning because it was more convenient for me, so fuck you. He laments about all the things he did to you and your friends, and he doesn't expect to be forgiven. However, once again you are given the option to forgive or do not. Forgiving him will result in this. Azrael tells you that he'll turn back into a flower soon, however, Frisk does this. And with that, the barrier is broken, and you and your friends can finally return to the surface. And as you all stare into the sunset, one by one each of your friends will leave before it's only you and Toriel. You then get the choice to stay with her or to go home. Now obviously I chose to stay with her because MILF. And with that, that brings the end of Undertale's true pacifist route. And at the end, we get a little unique end credit scene, showing what all the monsters have been up to since returning to the surface. And my favorite part about this end credit scene is that every time a monster appears, the motif of that character's song will play. A fun little detail that ends a fun little end credit scene. And that's the end of Undertale. Now, ordinarily, I would give my closing thoughts about Undertale, but we still have 2 more routes to talk about. So I'll save my closing thoughts for the true ending of the video, which is, oh my fucking god, it can't be close enough. However, there's one more thing I want to mention about the pacifist route before we move on to the neutral route, and that's the fact upon booting up Undertale again after beating the true pacifist route, you'll get this unique little dialogue from Flowey that I've never seen before. Instead of Flowey being the normally evil dickhead he is, he's actually rather pleasant here, as he still has some remnants of Azrael inside of him. He tells you that there's nothing left, but despite that, you should let Frisk be happy with their perfect ending. If you reset, you'll wipe everyone's memories, including his. And with that, you get the choice to continue or true reset. And that's the actual closing of Undertale's true pacifist route, as we now move on to Undertale's neutral route. Moving on to the neutral route, this route isn't very notable as it's a ramification of not committing to either the pacifist route or the genocide route. So for this section, instead of talking about Undertale as I did in the pacifist route, we're going to be bringing up some of the more nuances of Undertale. Things like hidden details, secrets, or just general fun facts. Now despite that fact, I'll be blunt with you and say the neutral route is probably my favorite route to do. The neutral route is a genocide route without the awful amount of grinding. A neutral run is supposed to be a combination of the other two. You can spare or kill anyone you please. Every single encounter can be played one of 2 ways, without any restrictions. You can spare all the bosses and kill all the normal enemies. You can kill only certain enemies and certain bosses, and even kill everyone without consequence if you don't grind. In fact, technically, not completing any of the side quests in the true pacifist ending will net you a neutral route ending, as every time you don't do a true pacifist or genocide route, the final boss is always the same, which we'll save until later. And that's why my favorite route is the neutral route. There are no restrictions to what you can do. The only restrictions there are the interactions and events locked behind certain routes. You can't go to the True Lab, and you can't get to the best boss fight either. However, despite the almost non-existent restrictions, every time I play the neutral route, it's almost always me killing every enemy I encounter. Not because I hate all the characters, but because I find the fighting in Undertale somewhat satisfying. Perfectly timing the gauge to hit the middle of the bar in order to get that golden flash is very satisfying. And watching the health drain from the enemy is also pretty satisfying. Maybe I'm a psychopath, I don't fucking know. While the fighting system isn't very in-depth compared to a lot of other games I've played, it really just boils down to pressing a button at the right time in order to do a max amount of damage. In a way, there's something very therapeutic about it. Maybe it's because I'm not as emotionally invested in these characters compared to some other people, and I realize the fact that it's a video game, so what the fuck does it matter? I know I sound like I don't like these characters, I do like them, but it's just that a lot of people get upset for some reason when you decide to do a genocide route or just kill any monster in general, which is really fucking stupid. It's a game, grow the fuck up. On top of that, this is also the fastest way to beat the game, with my fastest time being just about 2 hours. And that's skipping all the dialogue, timing attacks properly, and not dying once. Now, I only do all that when I want to play some Undertale and kill most of the enemies, because as I already mentioned, the fighting system is real fun. But I wouldn't recommend you do this if you've never played Undertale before. In fact, I wouldn't recommend the neutral route until you've done the other 2 routes, as I view it as more of a casual run for you to go and dick around in. Anyway, with those introductions questions out of the way for the neutral route, why don't we start bringing up those little hidden details, secrets, and whatever else I want to talk about. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to be going through each of the points like a bulletin list of topics. So if it seems like I'm reading down a list, it's because I am. The first thing I want to bring up is the constant reuse of leitmotifs. A leitmotif, as Google's AI puts it, is a more specific type of motif, often tied to a particular character, place, or idea within a narrative. Think of it as a leading motif that helps guide the listener through the story. Now, I want to get this out of the way as soon as possible. I'm not good with music. I don't know all the lingo and all that. Quite frankly, I'm pretty musically deaf. I don't really know the difference between keys and notes, so forgive me if I sound like a mentally handicapped ape trying to explain rocket science. In order to explain what I mean by the concept of a leitmotif, I'm going to use an example from Deltarune. Over the last few months, I've seen a meme pop up where people have been editing songs to have something called the freedom motif into it. This is what that sounds like. The freedom motif can be heard in all the Secret Bosses theme. The best example of this is The World's Revolving and Big Shot. With those two little examples, I hope you understand the concept of what I'm talking about. It's a reuse of a melody throughout multiple songs, and Undertale does it quite a lot, with the biggest example being Asriel's theme, which can be heard in the following tracks: Your Best Nightmare, Final, his theme, Memory, Undertale, The Choice, Small Shock, and Reunited. However, Asriel has two songs, the second one being Hopes and Dreams, which can be heard quite a few times in the following tracks: Final Power, Can You Really Call It a Hotel, I Didn't Receive a Mint on My Pillow or Anything, Hotel, Core Approach, and It's Showtime. By the way, all this information came from LL Game Show's video All Undertale Songs Are Connected, which is obviously going to be in the link in the description if you want to hear all the leitmotifs sprinkled throughout all the tracks. I recommend you go watch the video as it was very helpful for researching this part of the video, and it's a pretty good video overall. However, now that we've gotten out of the way what a leitmotif is, I want to go over some of my favorites throughout the entire game, and a lot of them are kinda obvious while others are pretty well hidden. Like the Ruins motif can be heard throughout a lot of tracks, like Waterfall having a slowed down version of Ruins as one of its backing tracks. One of the coolest motifs sprinkled throughout Undertale's tracks is the motif of Heartache, which can be found in Asgore and Enemy Approaching. The reason why I bring up Heartache's motif is because it's in the song Asgore, which is pretty fitting. Both of these fights are rather connected in some ways. During Toriel's fight, you have the option to act. In this act menu, you can talk to Toriel. Talking to her enough times, you get the prompt, quote, you try to think of something to say again, but... unquote. And talking to Asgore enough time in his fight, you'll get the prompt saying, quote, but there was nothing to say, unquote. And putting those two together, you try to think of something to say again, but there was nothing to say, which is pretty neat. Another interesting thing about Heartache's motif being in Asgore's song is the fact that Asgore's song's motif is not in Heartache at all. Toriel has moved on, but Asgore hasn't. Again. Pretty cool detail. A few more motifs that I wanted to point out are Mettaton's motif appearing in the tracks Hotel, It's Showtime, Live Report, Death by Glamour, Last Episode, and Metal Crusher, which in turn can be heard in Spook Tune and Spook Wave, which also in turn can be heard in Another Medium, which I might add, Another Medium's motif can be heard in Core. You see how connected all these tracks are? It's almost like someone made a whole video about it that you should totally go watch. But the last one I want to point out is Napstablook's motif appearing in, well, quite a lot of things. In fact, Napstablook's song is actually the boss theme for 4 separate bosses. Napstablook with Ghost Fight, Mad Dummy with, well, Mad Dummy, Muffet with Spider Dance, and Mad Mew Mew with Mad Mew Mew, just like Mad Dummy, who, wouldn't you believe it, is just Mad Dummy except in a different body. They're really good at naming their own songs. Also, while on the topic of Mad Mew Mew is an exclusive to the Nintendo Switch version, which I'm not going to be talking about as it's not turning 10 years old. Mad Mew Mew wasn't in the original, so this is the only time I'm going to be mentioning this character. And with that, that's just about all the motifs I wanted to talk about. So let's move on to our next topic, which is one of my favorite features in the game. Like I mentioned earlier, in the neutral route, you have no restrictions on who you can kill and who you can spare. However, if you decide to spare someone only to last second decide you wanted to kill them, well, Undertale has a feature called Betrayal Kills, where you show an enemy mercy only to kill them afterwards. The betrayal kill can be performed on a few select bosses, and most enemies. If an enemy can be put into a mercy state, then you can betrayal kill them. The betrayal kill is one of the most visceral things Undertale has to offer, and this is shown very clearly with Toriel's betrayal kill. Betrayal killing Toriel, she'll react in disgust that you would attack her at her most vulnerable and with her guard down, telling you that you're no different from the rest of them. And the worst part is, every time a betrayal kill is performed on one of the bosses, it's always a one-hit KO. And that's because you make an enemy put their guard down. Normally, it would take quite some time to kill a boss, but when you try to spare them, they put their guard down, making it easy to one-tap them, which is just very visceral and really makes you feel like a horrible person, which you won't need much of if you decide to do one of the other routes, but we'll get to that when the time comes. I think the betrayal kill is even worse on enemies like Papyrus and Muffet, who are the ones sparing you, only for you to strike them down. It really adds to the brutality of the killing. It's not something you can do on every enemy, but to the enemies you can do it on, it's visceral and brutal every time, and in a way makes you a worse person than just simply trying to kill them, because you gave them hope just to kill them when their guard was down, at their most vulnerable. And it's not something you can accidentally do. In order to betrayal kill someone, it's something you have to voluntarily take part in. And going back to Toriel's betrayal kill, if you notice the sprite used for her betrayal kill is different compared to the one where you normally kill her. It's more beat up. There's a visible slash on her face. It's the same sprite used in the genocide route, which, again, we'll get to when the time comes. But that's really it for the betrayal kill. It's just a very brutal thing you can do that the game will shame you for doing. While we're talking about Toriel's fight, if you kill her, but not betrayal kill her, at the end of the fight, if you feel bad and decide to reset and spare her, all is well, correct? Well, no. Of course, Toriel won't know that you killed her. However, someone does. Flowey. Killing Toriel, then resetting and sparing her, you'll get a unique piece of dialogue from Flowey mocking you for feeling bad, and that you're not the only one who possesses that power, which will become very apparent later on. The reason why I bring this up is because this brings me to the next talking point. Undertale Remembers. There's this interesting video that stuck with me long after watching it by the popular Undertale YouTuber Merg, called, well, Undertale Remembers. The reason why I remember this video so well is because it made me realize just how advanced Undertale is of a game. Not coding-wise, because that's a fucking mess, but storytelling-wise. Depending on certain actions you take during certain routes, some characters will remember those decisions. The two big examples being Sans and Flowey, but before we can get to those, we have to go over some small examples first. If you've played Undertale multiple times, you know about the part of the game where Toriel calls you asking you about your preference, so she can make a pie for you. If you've played the game before, Toriel will actually give you a unique piece of dialogue, predicting what choice you'll make depending on what choice you made previously. Or, during Asgore's fight, you can tell him that he's killed you before, which he'll respond with a simple nod. Or when meeting Papyrus for the first time, he'll say you look familiar. Same thing with meeting Sans for the first time. You'll instinctively turn around before he can say anything. But the biggest example of Undertale remembering is with Flowey, and again Sans. But Flowey easily being the biggest example by a long shot. Flowey definitely knows a lot more than what he lets on, and even more than what he chooses to tell you. Flowey has the same abilities as the player. He can reset the world and reload save states. And this is reflected during a neutral run. If you completed enough neutral runs, Flowey, instead of absorbing the 6 human souls, he'll instead tell you that there's no point in fighting you because he knows the human souls will revolt again, and he closes the game. Booting it back up, he'll constantly tell you that there's no point to coming back. He talks about things like Papyrus starting a Flowey fan club, or how he knows that you're only coming back just to mess with him. But easily the most interesting thing he says during one of these neutral run endings is about Sans. Flowey tells you to make sure Sans doesn't find out anything about you, and that Sans has caused Flowey a few resets of his own. This is because Sans knows about the same things that you and Flowey do. While he doesn't possess the abilities, he's definitely very aware of them. He knows every time you reset and every time Flowey resets. He remembers the most out of any of the main cast, and spoiler, during the genocide route, he'll even mock you counting how many times you've died trying to break you, and even during his fight he'll tell you some very interesting things that we'll get to when the time comes. But a very small snippet of that is that he knows that you've been causing problems, the most interesting one being, quote, "Our reports show a massive anomaly in the space-time continuum. Timelines jumping left and right, stopping and starting, until suddenly everything ends. That's your fault, isn't it? You can't understand how this feels, knowing one day, without warning, it's all gonna be reset," unquote. Sans knows a lot more than you think, and he lets you know that too. He's smarter than the game, and we're gonna have to wait a little bit more because I want to go in depth into Sans' character during the genocide route. But until then, remember, Sans is always watching, and he remembers too. The next topic we're going to be talking about is something called the fun value. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about this very briefly, however now I'm going to go fairly in-depth into it. In layman's terms, the fun value in Undertale determines what special events each player will get throughout different runs, and it's fairly in-depth. I've used that phrase to describe the fun value a total of twice now. Basically, it's a giant chart filled with a bunch of different random events that can occur depending on what fun value you get. If you have the fun value of 1, 51 through 55, 58, 59, 60, 64, 67 through 79, or 90, you won't get any special event. Fuck you, basically. 2 through 39, you'll get something called the wrong number song, which I've never seen footage of, or it's so arbitrary that I didn't even notice it. 40 through 45, you'll get a prank call from Sans. In 46 through 50, you'll get a call from Alphys. Depending on what you get, in Snowden, you'll receive a call from either Sans or Alphys. Sans' call is a prank call where he asks you if your refrigerator is running, and Alphys will try ordering a pizza and dial the wrong number, which happens before you meet her. What's even funnier about the Alphys call is during Jack's first playthrough, he actually got the fun value that was required, and he didn't even realize it, which I thought was funny. Having a fun value of 56 or 57, you'll get something called Nightmare Mode, which is a bit deceiving as it doesn't make the game any harder, it just simply adds an additional character to the word search that Sans leaves for you. Yeah, that's it. Getting a fun value of 61, 62, or 63 will net you a surprise visit from a few NPCs only referred to as Gaster followers. However, we're going to refrain from talking about them right now, as they're going to be more important when we actually talk about Gaster himself. So again, keep that in the back of your mind. I know, your mind must be overflowing right now, but bear with me. We're almost done. Getting a fun value of 65 will get access to the sound test room, which we did talk about earlier. To get to the sound test room, you'll have to go up to where the fishing rod would normally be in Snowden, and if you have the fun value of 65, you'll automatically be teleported there. Within the sound test room, you can find a few different tracks that don't normally appear in the game. Tracks like Happy Town, or Meat Factory, or everyone's favorite, Trouble Dingle. There's also a fourth track with a very interesting name, called Gaster's Theme, which sounds like this. Speaking of Gaster, having a fun value of 66, you'll get an extra hallway in Waterfall. However, there's actually an additional factor to this. If you have the fun value of 66, you can get an additional hallway within Waterfall, and it's just that, an extra hallway. However, if you have a fun value of 66 and get this extra hallway, there's a 10% chance that a door will appear, and inside this door, this sprite in the file is only known as Mystery Man, but I assume you already know who the community thinks this is. But again, we'll get to them in a minute. Having a fun value of 80 through 89, you'll get an NPC in Waterfall called Clam Girl, who will talk to you about her neighbor's daughter, Susie. Her dialogue will change depending on what decisions you make and what route you take, and we'll even have extra dialogue at the end of the game after defeating Azrael. And finally, having a fun value of 91 to 100, you'll get another NPC called Ghana Kid, who is a monotone version of Monster Kid, who asks the player, quote, "Have you ever thought of a world where everything is the exact same, except you don't exist? Everything functions perfectly without you. The thought terrifies me, unquote. A lot of people have speculated that this character is also connected to, well, again, we'll talk about him in a minute. However, in reality, Gorna Kid is probably making reference to the fun value, where there are runs of the game where you don't have the right fun value in order to encounter him, and he doesn't exist. He also has some alternate dialogue if you come back with an umbrella, but other than that, that's the fun value. It's a very interesting system that Toby implemented. It adds a lot to different runs. While it's not as dynamic or in-depth compared to other games that came out after the fact, it's still a really interesting system that serves its purpose well, and that's to add replayability. But the fun value isn't the only way to get secrets in Undertale. In fact, there's quite a few secret encounters and secret bosses, so let's tackle those. The first secret encounter you can have is with someone called Jerry. Now, Jerry is an interesting fight, as he's not always guaranteed to show up during a run, and I have absolutely no footage of encountering him throughout my several playthroughs I had of Undertale, so fuck me, huh, Jerry? Jerry is a unique enemy in the fact that he has no attacks of his own, but instead boosts the attacks of other enemies, making their attacks last 2 seconds longer than they would normally. On top of that, he's incredibly beefy, taking a long time to kill, and that's if you want to kill him, but I don't see why you wouldn't. Well, if you want to, instead, you can just ditch him, but killing him is always the better option. The second secret encounter slash boss is with an enemy called Glide. Glide is a mini-boss that can be encountered outside the mysterious door in the Snowden Forest, where Sans shows off his teleporting abilities. In order to encounter Glide, you must fulfill some specific conditions. In order to encounter Glide, you must enter the mysterious cave and move for at least 2 minutes. You must have an encounter with Glide before the fight with Papyrus. If you do it after, it won't work. Another caveat is, if an enemy is killed, Glide will not appear, so you must do a pacifist route before Papyrus's fight in order to get the fight with Glide. And how is the fight? Well, because it's an optional fight, it's not very groundbreaking, nor is it very notable. Because you have to do a pacifist route in order to get Glide, it's a rather tricky fight, especially because most of his attacks are just spam. Now, just because you have to do a pacifist route in order to encounter him, doesn't mean you have to be a pacifist to him. If you decide to attack him, he'll take quite some time to kill, and killing him will net you 100 EXP and 140 gold. Not bad. Speaking of this mysterious door, what's actually on the other side of it? Well, Toby. It's Toby Fox. In order to open this door, you must dodge all the names at the end of the true pacifist route. If you do that, you then get the message, "Incredible work, somewhere felt a door opening." So basically a little Easter egg that really has no other purpose, but cool, I guess. Honestly, the Easter egg isn't very practical to get. Not that it's too difficult to no-hit the credits, as the community calls it, but the reward for it isn't very worth the time or effort. A neat little Easter egg, but other than that, nothing too important. And the last secret boss slash encounter we have is of course the most famous, that being So Sorry. So Sorry is very interesting. In order to encounter So Sorry, you have to clear the following conditions. The player must have their PC date set as October 10th and the time set as 8 PM. Doing this will reveal a secret pathway to a lonely sign. Interacting with it, it will have the words Art Club meet here, next meeting, October 10th, 8 PM. Waiting around long enough, So Sorry will come and bump into you, starting the encounter. The encounter with So Sorry is pretty unique. Not only does he have his own attacks that no other enemy has, but he also has a unique gimmick that every time you encounter him on different runs, he'll have a different hat on. On top of that, he's also, I believe, the only enemy in the game who's unintentionally attacking you, as every time he attacks you in quotations, it's him trying to do something as an apology for bumping into you, whether it be finding a gift or drawing something for you. It's a rather tough encounter, having attacks similar to Asgore and some completely unique, like this paper one where the paper will stop piling up and still damage you. Then at some point he'll bring these drawings to life, which also have a pretty tricky attack. If you decide to attack and kill So Sorry, you'll be rewarded with 1 EXP and 300 gold. Something interesting I learned while researching this video is that So Sorry actually caused some controversy. Apparently, the person who made So Sorry and pledged $1,000 to have their OC put in the game originally created this character for fetish art about obesity, which, okay, but in all fairness, he did give Toby $1,000, so it's really not that big of a deal. And with that, that's the end of the secret encounters and secret bosses. Well, kinda. There's one more secret encounter we barely scratched the surface of. A few moments ago, we were talking about Undertale's fun value, and getting a fun value of 66, you'll get an extra hallway in Waterfall, and with an extra 10%, you'll also get an extra door. Within this door is a character who many believe is named W.D. Gaster. W.D. Gaster is a character mentioned very briefly during Heartland when Alphys tells you that he was the former royal scientist that created the core and ultimately fell into his creation, scattering him across time and space. I don't know exactly where the consensus that this mystery man in the mystery door was Gaster. I don't know where it started. I don't even know who started it or when it started. It's just something that kinda happened, kinda like how people started calling this character Golden Freddy because of Markiplier's playthrough. And the comparison between these two characters aren't going to stop, but we'll get back to that in a second. So who is Gaster? Well, he's a character that anyone even remotely familiar with Undertale will know the mystery around. He's mentioned very briefly a few times. He's theorized to be the mystery man in the door that appears in Waterfall. There's a track in the sound test room called Gaster's Theme. There's so much around this character. A character that, may I remind you, isn't even really official. Sure, he's implied to have existed at some point, but other than he was the former royal scientist who made the core, we don't know anything else about him. Some of the most popular Undertale theories are oriented around this character, one of the most popular being Game Theory's 3-part Who is Gaster series. For the longest time in the Undertale community, Gaster was this mysterious figure that would appear in fanworks as someone who's related to Sans and Papyrus for some reason. I guess it came from this design of the Mystery Man, which, as I already mentioned multiple times, a lot of people think is Gaster, which still hasn't been confirmed, so fuck you, I guess. I don't know if it's just me, but I never really understood the craze around Gaster, especially because back then, I already knew there was a high probability that Gaster is a character that doesn't even really matter to the overarching story. Same thing with this Mystery Man. These could just be Easter eggs. Last time I checked, the secret encounters / secret bosses don't have any importance to the overarching story. Gaster could easily be very much the same, or this Mystery Man, whatever you want to call it. And not to shit on people for getting excited over a character that may not even exist properly. Trust me, when Deltarune first came out, I wanted Gaster to be behind this door too, but being realistic, does Gaster really matter? Gaster, in my opinion, just like Golden Freddy, is a very frustrating character. At least with Golden Freddy, we got some sort of closure. Gaster hasn't received such treatment. Hell, we don't even know what or who Gaster is. This might not even be W.D. Gaster. Gaster might not even be a character that Toby intends to use. Theorizing about Gaster at this point just feels like grasping at straws. Anytime a mystery character speaks or even exists within Undertale or Deltarune, Gaster is the first character that comes to mind or is brought up. But for a second, let's entertain the idea of Gaster being a character that exists properly. This Mystery Man is Gaster. Okay, so first let's talk about the River Person. The River Person is a character I didn't bring up because they had no real significance. All they are is a fast traveling option. They take you from one place to another. However, in between these fast traveling points, they actually have some spoken dialogue, with one of the most interesting being, quote, "Tra-la-la, beware the man who speaks in hands," unquote. Okay, so how does this relate to Gaster? Well, going back to the True Lab, I mentioned that there was something called Unused Entry Number 17, where Alphys talks about monsters not being able to handle determination. Well, guess what? There's also another Unused Entry Number 17 that can be found in the Inaccessible Room 264, otherwise known as Gaster Room. The entry reads as follows. Entry number 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. Shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Unquote. While this text is playing in the background, some snippets from the audio track called ABC_123_A can be heard. That audio track sounds like this.
Hello, have some respect and don't spoil the game.
It's impossible to have mysteries nowadays.
Because of nosy people like you.
Please keep all of this between us.
If you post it online, I won't make any more secrets.
No one will be impressed.
It will be your fault.
This audio track, besides being rather creepy, is where Gaster gets his sound effects from. If you've ever seen an animation or anything related to Gaster, you've probably heard those sound effects. That clip is where they originate from. So how does this all relate to Gaster? In room 264, you may have noticed the text on screen isn't very legible. In fact, it just seems like a bunch of symbols. That's because the text is written in the font Wingdings, which is heavily associated with Gaster. Beware the man who speaks in hands. The man who speaks in Wingdings. But we can go a step further. The river person also has another line, quote, "Tra-la-la, beware the man who comes from the other world," unquote. This is interesting because of something we talked about earlier. When we were talking about the fun value, I briefly mentioned the fact that if your fun value was set to 61, 62, or 63, you would have an encounter with 3 NPCs. Those NPCs are known as the Gaster followers. Speaking to Gaster follower 1, they'll say the former royal scientist, Dr. W.D. Gaster, disappeared one day without a trace, and was shattered between time and space, and even brings up the fact that he's holding a piece of him, then vanishes. The second Gaster follower will bring up the fact that Asgore took a while to hire a new scientist, as Dr. Gaster was a tough act to follow, and once again brings up the fact that he was shattered across time and space, then questions whether or not Alphys would meet the same fate. Gaster follower 3 repeats practically the same as Gaster follower number 2, only this time describes the incident as one of Gaster's experiments going wrong, and before he finishes, he cuts himself off, saying, quote, "Well, I needn't gossip. After all, it's rude to talk about someone who's listening," unquote. There's actually one more NPC related to Gaster, and that being Ghana Kid, who I brought up earlier. The connection between Gaster and Ghana Kid are actually pretty interesting. Like I just mentioned, the river person will sometimes tell you to beware the man who comes from the other world, who is presumably Gaster, and Ghana Kid speaks of a world where everything is the exact same, except you don't exist. To me, it seems like not only is this a reference to the fun value, but Gaster as well. Gaster was shattered between time and space, meaning in some worlds he doesn't exist. The world goes on without him. Everything functions perfectly without you. Now, because this video is long enough, I'm going to cut the discussion of Gaster right here. If you want an actual comprehensive video about Gaster, well, there's a bunch of them on YouTube, so just look up Gaster. I'd be lying if I said I didn't find Gaster somewhat intriguing, but I'd also be lying if I didn't say that a lot of this seems like a lot of bullshit. But I guess only time can tell. Now that we talked about everything I wanted to pertaining to Undertale that wasn't route specific, let's continue talking about the neutral route. More specifically, its ending. In order to get a neutral route ending, all you need to do is not go for the true pacifist ending or the genocide ending. The way I did this is by killing every enemy I encounter, while not grinding them out like the genocide route. I do this because you get a decent chunk of health for the final boss, and believe me, you're going to need it. So how exactly do you get this ending? Well, you face off against Asgore, and that's it. I already mentioned my feelings about Asgore's fight, and how I thought it was really good. However, after beating Asgore, you get the option to spare him or kill him. No matter what you choose, Flowey will always come in and kill him. Flowey criticizes you for not having learned that in this world, it's kill or be killed. While you were busy fighting Asgore, he snuck into the other room and stole all 6 human souls. And after that, the game crashes. Booting it back up, everything seems normal at first. Long ago, 2 races ruled over Earth. One day... Welcome to Flowey's world. Using the power of all 6 human souls, he was able to gain access to your save point, making it his now. Within this save state, he has all the power in the world. Entering Flowey's world, you'll be greeted by nothing but a black void. However, continuing forward, you'll eventually bump into a save point. Trying to interact with it, this will happen. Flowey will start taunting you about how this is your fault because you were distracted with Asgore, and how useless you are to stop him. Flowey threatens you, telling you that he'll take your soul, and with it, show everyone what the true meaning of this world is. Then tells you that he erased your old save file so you can't escape, and now he has control over it. Without the player's control, Frisk steps forward, challenging Flowey, which makes Flowey laugh, saying, "You really are an idiot." Then we get the best reveal in any video game ever. and with that, you come face to face with Omega Flowey. Easily the most unique fight in the entire game, and one of the best as well. One of the best things about Omega Flowey's fight is the fact that his attacks are not predetermined, so every time you fight him, he'll use a different combination of attacks. Omega Flowey is easily the most intense fight in the entire game, even more so than the other two final bosses who have standard fights. The entire fight is so batshit crazy. Omega Flowey's design is also really fucking good. It's such a monstrosity. Now, I know I've been calling him Omega Flowey, but his real name is actually Photoshop Flowey or Flowey X, and you can obviously see why. His design is an amalgamation of different PNGs that Toby slapped together until you got this disgusting design that works really well in his defense. It's so nightmarish to say the least, and is easily one of my favorite designs. The amalgamation of plant, machine, and flesh really gives this design an uneasy edge. Paired with the song, the fight itself is also pretty nightmarish, with a song fittingly called Your Best Nightmare. So many of the attacks are just complete idiocy, in a good way of course. He'll try to impale you with vines, shoot stars from his eyes, a giant laser beam comes from the mouth in the middle, finger guns, literally, flamethrowers, nukes, he'll save and load save points at inconvenient times trying to get you. This entire fight is nothing but chaos, and it's 100% meant to be unfair. While it's not impossible, it's definitely unfair. And that's the point. Flowey has control of the entire game. For most of the fight, you're at his mercy. While you can dodge a lot of his attacks, some of them are incredibly difficult. And I think it's impressive as fuck that Merg was able to no-hit Flowey. Another reason why this fight is so unfair, besides the fact that Flowey has control of the entire game, is because it's a lot of RNG. Like I mentioned, no attacks are predetermined. He'll have a bunch of different combinations of attacks, and you'll have to get lucky. This can be either one of the hardest or one of the easiest fights in the game, depending on how lenient Flowey is. However, it's not completely in Flowey's favor. After surviving a volley of attacks from Omega Flowey, one of the souls inside of him will start to flash, signifying an attack from them. Surviving these attacks for long enough will spawn an act button, where you can call for help. Waiting a little bit longer through the attack, all the projectiles that once damaged you turn into healing items to help you. As the soul helps you, you also rid them of Flowey's control, while also lowering Flowey's defense. See, periodically through the fight, an attack button will show up. In order to finish the fight, you have to lower his health bar, like most enemies. However, you only do 2 damage per hit, which will literally take forever. However, surviving enough attack volleys, all 6 of the human souls will come and help you, lowering Flowey's defense to 0, meaning he takes a shit ton of damage per hit. And because this is the final stretch, you are attacked endlessly until you drain Flowey's health completely. However, how are you supposed to get healed? Well, periodically the 6 human souls will drop healing items for you. Going back to the 6 human souls attacks, these can range from piss easy to very difficult. Same thing with the healing items. Sometimes it's very hard to get full health, while other times it's extremely easy. Easily one of my favorite parts of the Omega Flowey fight is how much Flowey uses the game to his advantage. Saving and loading checkpoints to try and trip you up, cheating the game in his favor, using impossible attacks, and so much more. Dying at any point during the fight, you'll get the normal game over screen at first, as Gore tells you that this is all just a bad dream, before Flowey chimes in telling you you'll never wake up, before an endless amount of laughter occurs, then you'll be booted out of the game. Now, depending on how much Flowey wants to let you win, this fight can be very difficult or very easy. However, a caveat to that is every time you die and come back, you get some sort of checkpoint. If you complete one of the heart's attacks, you won't have to do that heart again, which just like Azrael's fight, kinda takes away from dying, as you can attempt the fight as many times as you want without losing much progress. Persevering and striking Flowey enough times, you'll get a fake out where Flowey pretends to be defeated only to reload a save point to where he has full health, only to absolutely decimate your ass, reloading and saving checkpoints over and over again until you get to a point where you only have a tiny bit of HP left. Flowey then surrounds you with pellets and prepares to kill you. As he does, he taunts you again by telling you that he's the god of this world and no one will help you. Calling for help is fruitless. He even gives you the option to do so, which of course doesn't work. And when he prepares to actually kill you, he's cut off. When he tries to reload a save point, that fails. Seems like the souls are revolting, and before Flowey can do anything about it, they destroy him. You then get the option to either kill or spare Flowey. Now, depending on what choices you made up until this point, you can do either or without consequence. Well, kinda. Sparing Flowey will start to piss him off, eventually threatening you before inevitably running away. However, if you decide to kill Flowey, those consequences will follow you through your next playthrough. Next time you boot up the game, Flowey won't be there to greet you. You've killed him. And I'm pretty sure if you go through another neutral route, you won't have to fight Omega Flowey. And that's the end of the neutral route, which brings me to the vast amount of endings you can get during the neutral route. Because to get a neutral route, you don't have to strictly do pacifist or strictly genocide. In fact, there's so many endings, I can't cover a good chunk of them here. However, if you want to see all the possible neutral run endings, there's a pretty popular video that's 32 minutes long showing all of them off. You can get multiple different endings by killing certain characters and sparing others. If you're truly interested in all of them, I recommend you go watch that video I mentioned, as I can't even begin to go in depth with any of them here. However, I'll mention a few interesting ones, like killing only Papyrus. Sans will obviously be pissed about that, calling you a dirty brother killer. You can also get some pretty interesting endings by doing little things like keeping the sticky band-aid on and taking a snow piece all the way to the end, or even never saving. A lot of endings just have random banter from Sans, or if you spared any of the other characters, from them as well. Flowey also has a few different endings, but I already talked about those when we were discussing the fact that Undertale remembers your past choices. Now that we've made it to the end of Undertale's neutral route, this means we can finally finish this video off with Undertale's genocide route. Now that we talked about the pacifist and neutral route, let's finish this video off by talking about the genocide route. But what is the genocide route? Undertale's genocide route, as the name implies, is a route where you kill everyone. No monster can be spared. What separates the genocide route from a neutral route is instead of just killing everyone you encounter, you must intentionally seek out monsters to kill. Doing this long enough, your save state will start a countdown on how many monsters are left in that area. In order to activate a genocide route, you must kill every monster in the area before fighting that area's boss. If these requirements are not met, you will abort the genocide route. If you do not kill every enemy in an area, you will abort the genocide route. If you spare an enemy at any point, you will abort the genocide route. Every enemy in every mini-boss must perish before fighting that area's boss. And that area's boss must also perish as well. There are so many ways to forfeit a genocide route, like failing to kill specific monsters that are required, an example being Snowdrake in Snowden. If you fail to kill him before exhausting the count, you'll get the special message, "The comedian got away." Failure. Another way to fail the genocide route is sparing monsters such as Papyrus or Monster Kid. There's only one monster in the game you can spare without consequences, but we'll get to that in a moment. Failing a genocide route will also net you some special dialogue from certain characters, mostly Flowey, who will mock you for your failure. And of course, failing a genocide route will revert your route to a neutral one. Now then, how do you start a genocide route? Well, simple. You walk, and you walk, and walk, and walk. Yeah, it's a bunch of walking around. It takes a really long time to start a genocide route, and for that reason alone, I never go for this route, even though it has the best boss fight in the entire game. The amount of grinding you have to do is generally mind-numbing. The best way to describe the genocide route is like a poorly crafted pepperoni pizza. Some bites have pepperoni and some don't. It's very jarring. However, that's the point. See, during both the neutral and genocide route, the game will shame you for doing terrible things. Being a terrible person has consequences, which is especially prevalent in the genocide route. It being boring is the point. Being a bad person isn't fun. The game punishes you for trying to be a bad person. It does this by having boring gameplay, crushingly punishing boss fights, boss enemies dying in one hit to make you feel bad, removing huge chunks of gameplay, puzzles, etc. Some NPCs will mock you, monsters will fear you, and all these changes are reflected perfectly in the music. all being slowed down versions of each of the area's themes. It really adds a very haunting atmosphere. You're butchering hundreds of monsters who only want to be free. Throughout the entire route, you can feel your sins crawling on your back as you enter desolate area after desolate area, devoid of all life. One of the most haunting tracks in the Genocide route is the Genocide version of Core, normally a very energetic track. The beginning of it is just so bone-shivering. Now, I could go on about the Genocide route and morality for hours, however, I don't have the time for that because this video is so fucking long as is. However, I do recommend a few videos on YouTube going over this very topic. Something the Genocide route does right is punishing you for being a bad person. The game shows you killing everyone has consequences, and this is reflected no more than in the absolutely brutal bosses. Compared to the pacifist and neutral route, the Genocide route only has 2 real bosses, and they are absolutely some of the hardest in the game. Well, kinda. I'll save my thoughts on that until later. Okay, let's say you want to do a Genocide route. How much more different is the Genocide route compared to the pacifist, or hell, even the neutral route? Well, as I already mentioned moments prior, very. Because you're going out of your way to kill every monster in every area, a lot of the game changes around that, and in some ways you may not be expecting. Because now you, the player, are deciding to become a monster, you catch the attention of another monster, that being Flowey. After completing a Genocide run through the ruins, Flowey will confront you about this, and Flowey sees right through you, and knows that Kara is behind this. He then tells you that you and him together will turn this entire world into dust. Flowey has now become a wingman of sorts. While you don't see him until the end, you'll definitely feel his effects throughout your journey, mainly through puzzles. During the Genocide route, you won't have to solve many puzzles as Flowey has already done them for you. And this is what I was talking about when I said the Genocide route removes a huge chunk of gameplay. The only thing you really need to worry about is killing monsters. Now this is where we can get into Flowey's character. I know this is really late, like multiple hours late, but I wanted to save talking about Flowey in depth until the Genocide route, as Flowey is easily the most interesting character. Continuing that, the Genocide route is also where Flowey gets a huge chunk of development. We learn quite a bit about Flowey through the Genocide route, mainly at the end where he details his story and what happened after he died as Asriel. When you reach the new home, instead of monsters telling you the story of Asriel, Flowey tells you what happened to him. Going back to the pacifist route during the True Lab, one of the entries mentioned that Alphys had taken a flower from Asgore's garden. That flower was Flowey, meaning yes, Alphys was the one who resurrected Asriel as Flowey. He tells you after waking up, he cried out for help, but nobody came. The same exact message that shows up after killing every monster in an area during a Genocide route. Eventually, Asgore shows up and Flowey tells him what happened to him. Asgore was in tears, but Flowey wasn't. In fact, Flowey couldn't feel any emotion. He didn't feel anything for anyone. After weeks with Asgore, Flowey decided to leave to the ruins and found Toriel, but he didn't feel anything for her either. And with that, he decided that he didn't want to live in a world without love or without Kara, and erased himself from existence. But as he did that, he felt regret and persisted, returning to a save point. Then he discovered his ability to save. Eventually, he experiments with this newfound power, killing himself over and over again, coming back every time. Then he tries something different. He experimented on the monsters around him, becoming friends with everyone, and when that got boring, he killed everyone over and over again just to see what would happen. And you of all people should know that feeling. He even calls the player out directly, saying, quote, "At least we're better than those sickos that stand around and watch it happen. Those pathetic people want to see it, but are too weak to do it themselves. I bet someone like that is watching right now, aren't they?" Unquote. Flowey tells the player that he's done everything the world has to offer. He's read every book, he's burned every book, he's won every game, he's lost every game. He appeased everyone, and he's killed everyone. He's seen everything. Besides Kara. He could never predict Kara, even revealing that Kara's determination is a lot stronger than his, and that frightens him. As you encounter him more and more and he keeps rambling on, he starts to show some emotions again, only this time, it's fear. He's afraid of you, the player, and Kara. and after that, he runs away. However, going back before all of this reveals a lot about Flowey. Flowey is a character who is a lot more powerful than meets the eye. He can save just like you, however, despite that fact, despite having the ability to reset the world anytime he wants, he still chooses to mess with the player. See, depending on what route you take, Flowey will be following you the entire time. Backtracking at certain moments in certain areas, you'll be able to find Flowey trailing you from behind, only to disappear once you get into view. He's trying to mess with you because he finds it funny, and he's trying to influence you. And there's a character who knows this. That being Sans, hence why he had that conversation with you at Grillby's. Sans is the biggest threat to Flowey, well, besides you. Regardless of Flowey's ability, you, the player, are still more powerful than he is, because you control what happens, you control what route you take, you decide who you spare and who you kill. The game wants you to know that your decisions are your own, and they do have consequences. Speaking of consequences, how about we get to those bosses? Like I mentioned, the Genocide route only has 2 real bosses, so we'll tackle each of them one at a time, but first we have to explain the other bosses. Exhausting the counter in the ruins in Snowden, you'll eventually have to face off against those areas' bosses, which is Toriel and Papyrus. Toriel's fight doesn't have anything to note. She only reacts in disgust like she did in her betrayal kill, saying that she was protecting them from you. Papyrus, on the other hand, is very interesting. Back in the Snowden section, I mentioned that Papyrus's end dialogue before his fight would change drastically depending on what route the player chose. Normally, Papyrus would try to capture you, however, in the Genocide route, he takes a different approach. Knowing that you're on a bad path, Papyrus tries to set you straight. Papyrus knows there's a great person in you and wants to help you, and seeing that you're approaching him, he assumes you want a hug and welcomes you with open arms, and that's when you strike him down. However, before he fully dies, he tells you that he still believes in you, and that you can be a good person if you try, before turning into dust. It's moments like these that really make you regret your actions. Even when you strike him down without mercy, he still believes in you. He still believes that you can do good if you believe in yourself. He still wants the best for you. It's another example of the game demonizing you for choosing this route. And this continues into the next area, Waterfall. For the most part, everything remains the same in Waterfall until you get to the end. If you remember throughout your journey in Waterfall, you may remember that Monster Kid is constantly following you, and that's a problem because your goal is to kill every monster you encounter. This eventually leads to a confrontation on the bridge where he normally would fall down, only this time it's slightly different. It starts off the same with Monster Kid saying Undyne told him to stay away from you, only this time it's because she said you hurt a lot of people. But he doesn't believe that, only for you to approach him. Knowing he messed up, he tries to be brave and follow in the footsteps of Undyne and challenges you to a fight, which starts an encounter with Monster Kid, with only one comment: in my way. Attacking him, this will happen. Undyne will step in and take the hit for him, one-tapping her like all the rest. She tells him to run and that she'll be fine. But in reality, she's not. In fact, you've hit her so hard, she's split in half, and she's ready to fall apart. She laments about those she couldn't save. Papyrus, Alphys, Asgore, she failed all of them. And as you expect the fight to end, this happens. But no, she's not ready to give up yet. Despite feeling like she's gonna turn to dust at any moment, she can't give up. If you pass her, you'll kill all of them. Monsters, humans, everyone, and she can't let you. Human, no, whatever you are. For the sake of the world, she, Undyne, will strike you down. And with that, the battle against the true heroine begins. This is it. This is absolutely the best fight in the entire game by a long shot. The only way to describe Undyne the Undying is absolutely electric. Everything about this fight is extraordinary. This fight is hard as balls. For the most part, it's a bunch of base Undyne's attacks, except a lot more difficult. Of course, the main gimmick of this fight is the green soul mode. However, the arrows this time around are a lot faster right off the bat. compared to the original fight where they didn't really get fast until like the final attack. Now, this transformation isn't too surprising, as killing Undyne in the neutral route, she'll do something similar where she persists even though her health is at 0 until she eventually gives in. Despite that, it's still a really shocking moment, and I don't think a lot of players expected it, nor did they expect it to be very difficult, and oh boy is it. The good thing about the Genocide bosses is all their attacks are choreographed, meaning they're the same every time. They occur in the same order no matter how many times you die and come back, and Undyne is no different. Just like the normal Undyne fight, Undyne will turn your soul green. In this green state, you'll have to defend yourself from oncoming arrows. Surviving enough volleys of this, she'll eventually turn you red. Now, the difference between the red attacks in Undyne and Undyne the Undying is that they're actually a lot more difficult and actually do pose a threat, even having some of the most difficult attacks in the game. Undyne the Undying will use 4 different red attacks, the first one being a barrage of spears that will move in a somewhat random pattern. The second one will be similar to the one in the base fight with a bunch of spears coming from the floor, except this time a lot faster, giving you less time to react. The third red attack is a storm of spears that will circle in on the player, having you dodge out of the pattern before it completely encloses on you. And the final red attack being a bombardment of spears that once again circle in on you, however, this time a lot faster. In order to dodge this attack, you'll have to move in a circle, but it's not that easy, as sometimes the pattern will break, meaning you'll have to adjust before it catches you. After surviving a set amount of red attacks, she'll turn you green again. Undyne will turn you green a total of 3 times. After the third one, you'll just have to survive a volley of red attacks until you eventually kill her. Every time she turns you green, the arrows will become much faster and much more tricky, introducing the backwards arrows much sooner than the base fight. One of my favorite things about this fight is the difficulty curve, or the non-existent one. So far, the Genocide route has been rather easy, all the bosses die in 1 hit, and the enemies die in a few. However, Undyne the Undying is the first boss to actually push back against the player. What's even better about this encounter is that it's far more difficult than any other boss in the other routes, which includes Azrael and Omega Flowey. It's the first fight in the game that's actually a challenge. Most players will not beat her on their first try, and in fact might take several hours just to do so. While the attacks sound simple enough in practice, they are very unforgiving. Not only that, but your healing items at this point aren't very good, meaning if you want a chance of survival, you'll have to get good at not getting hit, which adds an additional layer of pressure. And if you even want to have a chance at beating Undyne, you have to do the first few attacks without getting hit, or else you won't have enough healing items to survive the more difficult ones. The arrow attacks are pretty easy once you get the hang of them. It's the red attacks that really bump up the difficulty quite a bit, especially this one where the arrows circle in on you. I don't know what it is about this attack, but it's so difficult to dodge for me personally. The only time the arrow attacks get me is when they introduce the backwards ones and when they come in slowly, because both of them add an additional layer of panic. However, the red ones are just so unforgiving. When I play this fight and I get hit, I panic, and panicking in a situation where you're constantly being circled by projectiles isn't good, as you're most likely going to get hit by more. Now, a caveat to this fight can be made easier by equipping the cloudy glasses in Torn Notebook, which both give you additional time for iframes. In other words, longer invincibility, which is really fucking good because she does a shit ton of damage per hit. 11 damage is really bad because at this point, you practically only have Simonin bunnies, which recover 22 health. So sure, you can heal back 2 of her attacks, but once you get low on HP and healing items, then that's when shit really hits the fan. However, something that makes this fight thrilling no matter if you're winning or losing, doing good or doing bad, is the absolutely amazing track called A Battle Against a True Hero. This song, without a doubt, is easily my favorite in the entire OST, hands down. No other words besides masterpiece can describe this song. It makes the fight so dramatic, especially when it dies down only to have one of the hardest drops I've ever heard. It truly makes it feel like the world is at stake. It's Undyne trying to save the world from Mew, a battle against a true hero. Undyne won't give up so easily, she will stay resilient. Just like with Bone Trussell, this song isn't dynamic at all, but it always occurs at the best time because this fight is so electric. Anytime the drop happens, it's always so hype. It elevates the fight to a whole new level, and it's especially thrilling when you time it with the end of the fight. With the legendary music going off in the background and you delivering the final blow, oh my god, it's so good. The entire fight is a masterpiece and is easily, without a doubt, my favorite in the entire game. No other fight even comes close. But after delivering the final blow to Undyne, she's surprised that even this power wasn't enough to stop you. Undyne tells you she won't give up hope because she has her friends behind her. See, Alphys was watching you fight Undyne the entire time, and if she lost, Alphys would evacuate the underground to somewhere safe and contact Asgore to absorb the 6 human souls. And with that power, this world will live on. And with that, Undyne turns to dust. Undyne the Undying is absolutely the best moment in the entire game, and I think is worth buying and playing Undertale solely for this fight alone. Easily my favorite moment in the game, and is also one of my favorite moments in gaming. So fucking good. What about the other fight? Well, we still have Hotland to talk about. You didn't think I'd skip over that, did you? Well, kind of. See, Hotland, just like Waterfall, is largely the same, only this time when entering Alphys' lab, she's of course not there because she evacuated most of the monsters to somewhere safe. However, Mettaton is there, waiting for you, telling you that yours and his time to fight will come, and then he leaves. There's one major difference between Hotland in Genocide and Hotland in the other routes, and that's just like the puzzles in the other areas, you don't have to do a big chunk of gameplay. You don't have any more encounters with Mettaton until you fight him, and you don't have to do any of the puzzles. It's all done for you. So what about the fight with Mettaton? Well, confronting Mettaton, he's been here waiting for you the entire time. He tells you that his original programming, that being the anti-human combat features, are still within him, and he's going to use them to become his final form and stop you. And with that, he transforms into Mettaton Neo. Seems like we're going to have another fight, except no, it's a fake out, and he too dies in one hit. I know this is meant to show just how powerful you've become, but I still would have preferred an actual fight against Mettaton, because other than Undyne the Undying, the Genocide route just isn't very worth it. Well, that's what it may seem at first. After killing Mettaton and moving forward, you arrive at the king's castle, then Flowey gives you his whole backstory and shit, then you scare him off. After scaring him off, you arrive at the final corridor. Throughout your journey, you've killed every monster you encountered, besides one, and now he's here to judge you for your sins. Yep, the final boss of the Genocide route is, of course, Sans. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone watching this video. It's easily the most hyped and talk about fight in the entire game. Does it deserve that reputation? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Meeting with Sans, he'll tell you that you've been busy and he has a question for you. He asks you, do you think even the worst people can change, that everyone can be a good person if they try? Try asking that to any US politician. Your character will then step forward, which will prompt Sans to give you a better question. Do you want to have a bad time? Because if you take another step forward, you're really not going to like what happens next. And of course, your character steps forward. Then Sans apologizes to Toriel. It's a beautiful day outside. Birds are singing, flowers are blooming. On days like these, kids like you should be burning in hell. And with that, Sans starts the encounter. Welp, this is it. The final boss of Undertale's Genocide route. Well, if you survive the first attack, of course. Always wondered why monsters never use their strongest attack first. This is the most infamous fight in the game. It has a reputation for being brutally difficult, and I'll be honest, I don't get why. This fight isn't very difficult once you get the attack pattern down, but I'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about Sans during the Genocide route real quick. Sans is normally a goofy, lazy prankster during the Pacifist route. However, during the Genocide route, he's very different. I've already mentioned that he knows a lot more than what he lets on, and that shows a lot during the Genocide route. Sans knows the full extent of your power. He knows you have the ability to reset and save. He knows if he kills you, you'll just come back, and in fact even mocks you about it. Every time you die, he constantly makes comments about it. But the thing is, Sans knew this was going to happen. It was inevitable that he would have to stop you. Back in Snowden during the genocide route, Sans will have some rather interesting dialogue, making reference to the fact that he knows what you're up to. Lines like, quote, "My brother would really like to see a human, so you know it'd really help me out if you keep pretending to be one," unquote. Or during the Bridge of Doom, before facing Papyrus, talking to Sans, he'll tell you if you keep going down the way you are now, you're going to have a bad time before disappearing. Sans isn't stupid. He knows what you're up to from the moment you first meet him, where you don't laugh at his whoopee cushion or hide behind the lamp. Sure, Sans has shown that he's unlike everyone else, but he really lets go of that during the genocide route. The mask is completely off, which was reflected in his fight. Now, in recent times, I've seen a lot of people having mischaracterized Sans in a pretty dumbass way. A lot of people paint Sans as one of two caricatures. Either he's dramatic as fuck, as depicted in most Undertale genocide fan games, getting angry as fuck in summoning his ultra rage move, or not dramatic enough, like, oh no, Papyrus died, that sucks, anyway I slept with your mom and I shat myself.
It was just me, I shat myself!
Not to take a jab at if Undertale was realistic, but Sans is very much a balance of the two. He's a goofy jokester who knows when to get serious, and people assuming he doesn't care that you killed Papyrus because he's not bawling his eyes out, or sockets in, out, whatever you want to call it, is just flat out wrong, because every time you do kill Papyrus, whether it be the genocide route or the neutral route, he'll call you out for it. He does care, but in a way he knows what's done is done, and it doesn't matter as you'll reset the timeline again and again, over and over again. As he puts it himself, quote, "You can't understand how this feels, knowing that one day, without warning, it's all going to be reset," unquote. He doesn't bother showing emotions because he knows it doesn't matter. He knows all he can do is stall you for as long as he can before you inevitably get him. Despite that fact, he still tries just to inconvenience you. Before we actually get into Sans' fight, we have to talk about his theme, that of course being Megalovania. Over the years, this song has been completely bastardized, and is only really known as the funny Sans Undertale song. But in my opinion, I think this song still holds up really well, and is a very climactic final boss theme. While it's not my favorite track, or hell, even my favorite final boss track, I still think it's really good and still adds a lot to the fight. Even if, whenever I hear it, I can't help but think about the memes. So what about the fight itself? Well, Sans' fight, just like Undyne's, remains the same throughout the first few attacks. So the way this is going to work is I'll be breaking down Sans' fight piece by piece and attack by attack, because quite frankly, that's the only good way to talk about this fight. Sans uses the same exact attacks every single time, no matter how many times you come back. So what type of attacks does Sans have? Throughout the entire duration of the fight, Sans will use a combination of blue and red attacks. However, the first phase besides the first attack, Sans will only use blue attacks. So think of it as a more difficult version of Papyrus' fight. So after surviving Sans' first attack, what's in store for you? The first real attack is jumping in between tiny bones on the floor. In order to dodge this attack properly, you have to get into a rhythm. Messing it up at any time will guarantee you get hit. Because you have to get the timing so perfectly, it's one of the easiest attacks to accidentally mess up. The next attack will be similar, except you have to jump over bones while also landing at the right time so you don't get hit by the blue ones. It's a pretty tricky attack to get down, and was easily the biggest hurdle when I fought Sans. Mostly because the timing is kinda tight. Even if you're a few pixels off the floor, the blue bone will still hurt you. The next attack is similar to the first one, except the bones vary in length, meaning you have to hold the up arrow for the appropriate amount of time in order to not get hit. Not too bad once you get the hang of it. Now, these attacks are very similar to Papyrus, mostly being more difficult versions of his. However, Sans has a few unique attacks of his own, mainly these attacks with platforms, which are some of my favorite in the game. The first one will have you jumping between platforms with a pit of bones at the bottom. On the third jump, there'll be a bone right above the platform, meaning you have to adjust your jump so you don't get smacked by it, while also dodging the second bone that comes right as you jump off. The second platform attack is a lot more tight. However, in a way, it's kind of easier once you get into the rhythm of it. It's pretty satisfying to perfectly slide into the pattern. It too will have you jumping from platform to platform, dodging bones on the way there. And at the end, you have to jump over two giant bones before the other one can close in from behind. It's a pretty easy attack overall. The next attack will have you going in a circle motion, dodging bone after bone while trying not to get caught up on the platforms. This attack is a lot easier if you decide to stick to the bottom. It can easily be one of the trickiest attacks depending on what pattern of bone you get. The next attack is one of Sans' easiest. At first it might look pretty tricky, but basically all you have to do is jump over this one and go to the absolute edge of the platform, and you'll dodge the next two bones going forward and coming back. And before you get to the first bone again, jump off the platform as the attack timer will run out before you hit the bottom. It's at this point in the fight where you shouldn't have gotten hit a lot. If you want to stand a chance against Sans, you're going to have to do the first few attacks up until this point as perfectly as you can, trying to get hit the least amount, or else you're simply not going to have enough healing items to survive his next phase. And trust me, you're going to need it. Then Sans introduces one of his trickiest attacks. This attack consists of moving platforms with Gaster Blasters constantly shooting each of the different platforms. The best way to dodge this attack is to stay at the bottom, but that's not it. Because the Gaster Blasters don't have a set pattern, they can appear anywhere in the arena, even in the same spot multiple times. On top of that, you have very little time to process what's even happening. All you have to do is pay close attention to where the Gaster Blasters are so you don't get tripped up by them. Because if two appear at the bottom and you're already falling, well, tough shit, you're going to lose a huge chunk of HP. So in order to dodge this attack properly, you really have to pay attention. The next attack is similar to the previous one before the Gaster Blasters, only a lot more difficult. I don't really have a tip for this one, just dodge properly and jump over the bones when you approach them, and use the same trick as the first time by jumping off before you hit the first bone again. And that was his last attack that was guaranteed to happen. At this point, depending on how long you've progressed the fight, Sans will use a volley of random attacks. Now I should probably mention how progressing the fight works. In order to progress the fight, you must attack Sans. Well, of course, yes, he does dodge it, it still progresses the fight further. However, using a healing item or trying to spare Sans will not progress the fight at all. However, the attacks will still occur in the same pattern, meaning this fight can be very long or very short. In fact, Sans' fight only takes about 7 minutes if you're playing optimally, and no hitting it can take even less with about 5 minutes. However, if you die at any point during the fight, you'll have to start over at the beginning. Length is not the problem, it's the brutal difficulty, or that's what it may seem at first. Sans is often touted as the most difficult boss in the game, and in fact is on multiple lists of some of the hardest video game bosses ever, which isn't the case. And no, it's not because I'm good at video games, trust me, I'm terrible, but Sans' fight might be one of the most over-exaggerated fights in recent gaming. It only took me around 20 attempts, which may sound like a lot, but it's not for a boss that's often regarded as one of the most difficult bosses in gaming, and had YouTubers spending hours failing attempt after attempt. While I'm not gonna say Sans' fight is easy, it's definitely not as difficult as many say it is. In fact, Undying the Undying's fight, in my opinion, is a lot more difficult. Not only do you have less health, but the timing is more tight. If you can master Sans' first phase and have a huge chunk of healing items, the second phase becomes near arbitrary. In fact, the fight itself can be made easier using the cloudy glasses and torn notebook, just like with Undying the Undying. On top of that, you have both the pie and instant noodles, which give you 2 instant refills of your health. The only reason why it's even remotely difficult is because it's punishing every time you get hit. But if you barely get hit, that's a different story. Speaking of the second phase, after progressing the fight long enough, Sans will eventually try to break through to you and offer you mercy, which you should definitely not take, as if you do try to spare Sans, he'll kill you. He'll just flat out kill you. And that's where the get dunked on line comes from. So obviously we're not going to do that. And attacking Sans again, you'll start phase 2. And this is where the real fight begins. This phase consists of 3 different attacks: random bullshit, 2 sizes of Gaster Blaster, and Bone Slams. In addition to that, he also adds bones onto your HUD that, if you touch them, will damage you, which is a rather clever inversion of expectation, because in every fight in Undertale ever, you are perfectly safe in your HUD, but not with Sans, which goes to show just how much Sans is willing to go to try and break you. It also shows more of his anomalistic abilities. In fact, this is shown even more later on in the fight when he starts teleporting around. So what about those attacks? In my opinion, the easiest attack in phase 2 is the random bullshit. Just like the name implies, Sans will throw you into a bunch of random different attacks. Some attacks are more difficult versions of phase 1s, while some of them are unique to this phase alone. A lot of them are pretty tight platforming or having you react fast enough to dodge oncoming attacks. There's like 10 different unique attacks that he can throw at you, and every time it's randomized, which really keeps you on your toes. The second attack he has is the Gaster Blasters. You'll be be thrown into a large arena where Gaster Blasters will home in on your location. He has two variants of this attack, that being the faster and skinnier ones and the bigger and slower ones. The skinnier ones will shoot not only faster but home in on you faster, and the slow ones will shoot slower but have a bigger blast radius. And the last attack he'll use are these bone slams, where he'll slam you to one side of the arena only to try and impale you with the bones. Now he'll do this a few different times. Every time he does, he'll get faster and faster. However, there's a little trick. If you hold down all of your arrow keys at once, you will physically become impossible to hit. No matter what side of the arena he slams you to, you'll always jump at the right time, which negates one of the hardest attacks in Sans' arsenal. Before we end this fight, let's talk a little bit about Sans' dialogue during the fight. We've already talked about the fact that he knows that you're an anomaly, causing timelines to stop and start at random. However, he has some more interesting dialogue that sheds more light onto his character. There's a string of dialogue that I find very interesting from Sans. Quote, "You can't understand how this feels knowing that one day without warning, it's all gonna be reset. Look, I gave up trying to go back a long time ago, and getting to the surface doesn't really appeal anymore either. Cause if we do, we'll just end up back here again without any memory of it, right?" Unquote. Sans knows no matter what he does, he'll eventually end up in the situation again. You'll reset, you'll do another genocide run, and he'll be forced to face you again. Adding, quote, "To be blunt, it makes it kind of hard to give it my all. Or is that just a poor excuse for being lazy? Hell if I know. All I know is, seeing what comes next, I can't afford not to care anymore." Unquote. Sans has seen the different timelines that occurred. Either you and him are friends or you fight each other. One of the most interesting pieces of dialogue that Sans can give you is after sparing him and him killing you, coming back, he'll tell you, quote, "Whoa, you look really pissed off. Did I get you? Well, if you came back anyway. I guess that means we were never friends. Just don't tell the other Sanses, okay?" Unquote. The other Sanses? This kinda adds on to what I was saying earlier about the different timelines. Every single run of Undertale is technically a different timeline. You can either do a pacifist route, a neutral route, or a genocide route. Either way, Sans will still remember. And it's something he acknowledges during the fight. Quote, "Sounds strange, but before all this, I was secretly hoping we could be friends. I always thought the anomaly was doing this because they were unhappy, and when they got what they wanted, they would stop all this. And maybe all they needed was, I don't know, some good food, some bad laughs, and some nice friends." Unquote. Sans acknowledges the fact that no matter what he does, you'll always come back unsatisfied, always wanting more. Adding, quote, "But that's ridiculous, right? Yeah, you're the type of person who won't ever be happy. You'll keep consuming timelines over and over again until, well, hey, take it from me, kid. Someday you gotta learn when to quit." Unquote. Then threatens you, saying that day is a day. That then leads into the end of the fight. Sans then tells you that if you keep pushing him and continuing forward, he'll be forced to use his special attack. In total, Sans has 23 attacks, and after surviving 22 of them, Sans tells you if you survive this one, he'll use his special attack. And this is the be-all to end-all. If you survive this, it's the end of the fight. And if you don't, you have to reset all the way from the beginning. The attack begins with a few bone slams, then he'll throw you into a circular motion where you have to weave in and out of bones, then throw you down a corridor with, quite frankly, a lot of bones. First, you'll have to stay within a pattern to avoid taking a huge chunk of damage, except for the fact that sometimes it bugs out and the bones won't actually hurt you. The second one has you changing course between up and down, and the final one having a narrow path that you have to outrun before it closes in on you. And as soon as you hit the wall, you have to wait half a second before jumping or else you'll get impaled. Then you have a bunch of bone walls, before he'll eventually summon in a shit ton of Gaster Blasters, which in order to dodge, you have to stay within a circular pattern. And if you get caught up, it's practically game over. And finally, he slams you around a bunch of times, and that's the end of the fight. Well, not really. He still has his special attack. So what is Sans' special attack? Well, it's this. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. His special attack is nothing. Sans knows that he can't beat you and you'll probably get him eventually. Unfortunately for you, there won't be a next turn. You and him will stand there for the rest of the time, or until you quit. Sans then drops this banger of a line. Quote, "You'll get bored here, if you haven't gotten bored already, I mean. And then, you'll finally quit. I know your type. You're, very determined, aren't you? You'll never give up, even if there's, absolutely no benefit to persevering whatsoever. And if I can make that clear, no matter what, you'll keep coming back, not out of any desire for good or evil, but because you think you can, and because you can, you have to. Unquote. You do all of this because you know you can, and you know the outcome will eventually be the same. Speaking of which, eventually Sans will drift asleep, and when he's fully sleeping, well, he's not there to stop you anymore. However, it's still not your turn, so how do you get out of this? Well, you break the game, of course. Dragging the arena to the fight button, you'll finally be able to end the encounter. With one final blow, you finally take Sans down. Before going away, he tells you, quote, "Don't say I didn't warn you. I'm going to Grillby's. Papyrus, do you want anything?" Unquote. And with that, the encounter is finished. Hey, so I don't know if you can tell, but this was recorded after everything was said and done. Originally during the script, I was supposed to mention that after striking Sans, that he bleeds, which is weird because he's a skeleton and skeletons don't bleed. I was originally going to bring up the fact that this caused a bit of debate back in the early days of the Undertale community, mostly whether or not Sans was actually a human in disguise. It's probably just meant to add more of an impact to the end of the fight, and probably doesn't actually mean anything. Toby probably added it just to be more dramatic. So, yeah, I'm retarded. I forgot to bring this up in the script, which isn't very surprising because there's a lot of other things I forgot to bring up in the video or write in the script in general, but whatever. Continuing forward to Asgore's throne room, he's there talking to someone, or something. He then says that he's never seen a flower cry before. Afterwards, turning around, he realizes that you're the one the flower was warning him about. Not realizing what kind of danger he's in, he continues with introductions, and even asks you what monster you are, as he can't tell. This is interesting because before, during the other routes, he was immediately able to tell that you were human. However, during the genocide route, he can't, because are you really? That's a trend that's been happening all throughout the genocide route. First being brought up by Sans by telling you to keep pretending to be one, then Undyne says whatever you are, and Sans again calls you an anomaly, and finally now Asgore doesn't even see that you're human. So what's going on? Well, it's about to be explained in a moment, so let's continue. Before he can finish his sentence, an encounter starts with him. He tells you that there's no need to fight and offers you a cup of tea before you strike him down. Before you can finish him off, Flowey comes in and steals the kill. He tells the player that he can be useful to you and he won't get in your way. Now, if you notice, his sprite actually has the face of Asriel on it. This is Kara, the first fallen human. Greetings, I am Kara. Thank you, your power has awakened me from death. My human soul, my determination, they were not mine, but yours. At first I was so confused. Our plan had failed, hadn't it? Why was I brought back to life? You, with your guidance. I realized the purpose of my reincarnation. Power. Together, we eradicated the enemy and became strong. HP, attack, defense, gold, EXP, LV. Every time a number increased, that feeling, that's me, Kara. Now, we've reached the absolute. There's nothing left for us here. Let's erase this pointless world and move on to the next. You then get the option to erase the world or do not. Now, I'm pretty sure you get the same outcome no matter what choice you pick, except with a few different dialogue changes. However, we're just going to do the one I chose, which was to erase the world, and once you do that, Kara attacks you and closes the game. And once you boot it up again, there is nothing but the faint sound of hollowing wind. You've erased the world. There is nothing left for you. Now, this can be undone one of two ways. Either you can go in the files and fuck around a bit, or you can wait approximately 10 minutes. Then Kara will come back on screen asking you if you regret your choice. And if you do, they'll give you the choice to sell your soul to them in order to bring the world back. Doing this, you'll then enter the soulless route. Now, during the soulless route, you can still go for another genocide route, a neutral route, or a true pacifist route. However, at the end of the true pacifist route, when Toriel leaves the pie out for you, this will happen. And that was the end of Undertale's Genocide route. The Genocide route was strange. It was a mixture of great fights, but also being a lot of nothing. My overall opinion on it is very mixed. Sure, you get the best boss fight in the game, with Undying the Undying, but you also get a pretty lackluster ending with a bunch of mind-numbing gameplay. While it's definitely my least favorite route, I still think it's a very important inclusion in the game, and I think Undertale wouldn't be the game it is without it. So I guess we have that to thank for it. But now that we finished the Genocide route, that also means we finished Undertale. Now that we discussed everything about Undertale, I'm going to finish this video off with a few of my favorites from each of the different aspects, so here they are. So here are my closing thoughts about Undertale. I think Undertale is one of the best games I've ever played and is easily one of my favorites of all time. Everything about this game is near perfect. The characters are funny, relatable, and all have unique personalities. To say Undertale's characters are well written would be the understatement of the century. Undertale really makes you feel for these characters, and not one of them are bad. Even the side characters and NPCs all have unique and quirky personalities, making them a lot more memorable than side characters and NPCs from other games, which barely even get a lick of dialogue. The music is absolutely fantastic and really beautiful at times, making it my favorite OST in gaming, hands down. While I'm not musically educated, I can still appreciate each of the different tracks in their own way. And in my opinion, I don't think Undertale has even one bad song. Hell, not even one mediocre one. I think each and every one of them is near perfect, and perfectly fits the tone of the game. But easily my favorite part about Undertale is each of the fights. I've already described my favorite in each of the routes, but I still think Undertale's battle system holds up pretty well 10 years later. Undertale is easily able to provide interesting and captivating gameplay throughout the entire journey. Well, minus the Genocide route, but that's a little misstep. It's so easy for me to say how much I love this game and how much it had an impact on my life. I care about this game so much, I really hope I was able to do it justice in this video. So what comes after Undertale? What did Toby do after dropping this masterpiece? Well, he moved on to a new game called Deltarune. And I'll be quite honest, I have some very mixed opinions about Deltarune. I've seen a lot of people online recently say Deltarune is a better version of Undertale, and in some aspects that might be true, but in a lot of others, that couldn't be further from the truth. While I'm glad Toby is still working on games, Deltarune is just a bit too different for me. While a lot of Deltarune follows in the footsteps of Undertale, it diverts in some pretty major ways that I don't quite frankly like, mostly how memey it is. It's kinda hard to describe what I mean by that, but the best way I can describe it is that it heavily relies on too many dumb jokes and gags. While Undertale did have a few moments like that, they were far and few between. And sure, the humor is consistent going into Deltarune, but Deltarune feels like it's way too in your face about it. Well, at least for the first two chapters. I don't know about chapter 3 and 4, because quite frankly, I haven't seen anything about them because I kinda lost interest in Deltarune. I don't think Deltarune is a bad game, it's just not my cup of tea. And to me, Undertale will always be the superior game, while Deltarune will only ever loom in its unescapable shadow. And with that, I think it's about time the video ends. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.